In the frontier territory of Kazal, a terrible drought had struck. The wells had dried up, the soil was cracked, and the fields could no longer give crops. With no water and no hope, the people had fallen into fear and began to run away from their homes in search of survival. But Margrave Kazal, the ruler of the land, considered their escape to be an unforgivable crime. To him, abandoning the land was equal to rebellion. To punish them, he sent out soldiers, and at the front of this bloody mission was his son, a young master known to be a powerful magician. It was said that divine blood of the ancient kings flowed through his veins, and he carried himself with cruelty and arrogance. When he saw the frightened peasants, he shouted angrily that even beasts knew how to repay kindness and asked if these vermin understood why they were still alive. He declared that it was only thanks to the grace of those with divine blood like himself, and yet they dared to run away just because it had not rained for a short while. He said it was shameless and impudent. Among the desperate crowd, a woman had fallen to her knees and cried out with tears, begging for mercy and pleading that at least her child be spared. But before her words could even soften their hearts, a soldier struck her down with his weapon, killing her without hesitation. The young master then scolded them, saying they were thoughtless and boring, for such weak killings gave him no amusement. The soldier bowed and apologized, asking what they could do to entertain him further. As they marched on, the soldiers continued beating, torturing, and slaughtering helpless villagers just to please the young master and satisfy his cruel desire for fun. But amidst the bloodshed, one man said that they should not treat the blood of divine kings so lightly, hinting that such arrogance would one day bring consequences. The young master leaned in with a cruel grin when he saw a familiar figure among the knights and said it was none other than Sir Zebek, his old sword instructor. Zebek looked at the cruelty unfolding before his eyes and asked if there was truly any need to go this far in punishing helpless villagers. He told the young master that a noble who carried the blood of a divine king should at least hold on to his dignity. But the young master answered with arrogance, saying that his dignity would remain safe as long as no word of what happened here escaped. He declared that the peasants had dared to tarnish his pride just because rain had not fallen for some time, and that was the reason they had to suffer. He then turned to Zebek with a mocking tone and asked what he would do. Would Zebek, a holy knight honored by the king's church, dare to spread word of these acts and disgrace the noble blood he claimed to serve? Zebek only replied calmly that the truth could not be hidden forever, but his words carried no weight for the young master. Instead, the young master picked up a whip and struck a woman named Safia, who screamed out in terrible pain as the lashes tore her flesh. He then looked back at Zebek and told him to smile, saying that life was meant to be enjoyed, before he walked away as if her suffering meant nothing. That night, after the soldiers had fallen asleep and the camp was quiet, Zebek went secretly to where Safia lay in pain. He lifted her head gently and poured water into her dry mouth. With faint breaths she whispered, asking who he really was, but Zebek hushed her softly and told her to remain silent. He then asked if she was able to eat, and when she gave him the slightest sign he fed her carefully. When morning came, Zebek gently woke Safia and told her that he had come without anyone knowing, so he had to leave before he was discovered. He explained that if the young master found out about his actions, he would be punished. Safia, still weak but determined, asked him to at least tell her his name, promising that she would ask the Herald clan to spare him when they arrived. At her words, Zebek frowned and asked if she truly meant the Herald clan, the ones called the Slayers of Sanctity, those soulless heretics. He said she had contracted them, but questioned if they even existed. Even if they did come, he argued, Kazal had 20 well-armed soldiers under his command, Zebek himself, and above all, the young master who carried blue blood. He reminded her that she must already know how powerful divine blood, the blood of Yagas, was. But Safia answered with quiet certainty, saying that even if the young master was a magician, the Herald clan was also formed of magicians and they were capable of killing him. She explained that the reason they were called the Slayers of Sanctity was because they had earned that name by killing kings who carried divine blood. Zebek held his head in frustration and told her she was not in her right mind, for anyone who had gone through such torment would be left traumatized. He then revealed his name, saying that he was Zebek, a holy knight of the king's church, and that he did not share his name in order to beg the Slayers of Sanctity to spare his life. He declared that if they did come, he would fight them with everything he had. Before leaving, he told her he would return again at night, and then he walked away into the camp, leaving her with both hope and uncertainty. Safia's mind wandered back to the past when she remembered her fiancé Ifan. She recalled how he had once given her a single gold coin and asked if she had ever heard of the Herald clan. He explained that the coin was the Emperor's gold, A cursed object said to summon the soulless ones and warned her that possession of it was punishable by death if the heretical interrogators of the king's church ever discovered it. Confused and frightened, she had asked him why he would give her such a dangerous gift. Ifan had answered gently that it was only to protect her, saying that if anything were to happen to them, she could use the coin by drawing a triangle on the ground, placing the coin at its center, and then a herald would appear to help her. He admitted he hoped she would never need to use it, but wanted her to have it just in case. That memory cut deep into her heart as she now found herself clinging to the lifeless body of her fiancé, who had been hung by a rope before her eyes. She cuddled him helplessly and whispered to herself in grief that it had only been 2 days, begging silently for the strength to hold on just one more day. The scene then shifted to the present, where Xebec and the young master marched with their soldiers under the scorching sun. Xebec thought to himself that the day felt unusually hot, but his reflection was broken by the voice of the young master, who laughed and asked if this was not entertaining. Xebec replied coldly that if they kept killing citizens like this, then there would be no one left to pay taxes. The young master only smirked at the remark and said that the wanderers were already restless, dissatisfied people were moving around the land, and theft was steadily increasing. To him, such chaos seemed to be nothing more than a game, while to Xebec it was a slow path toward ruin. As they marched on, Xebec tried once more to reason with the young master. He told him that in the Margrave's territory there was rich soil, and the people could be evacuated there instead of left to die. He asked why innocent children born on fertile land had to suffer for the actions of adults he called virtueless. But the young master answered coldly that he was speaking of people who would ruin agriculture and run away, ungrateful for what they had been given. Xebec countered that agriculture depended on an individual's skill and effort, not on blind punishment. Yet the young master smirked and argued otherwise. He said that farming depended on the soil, the climate, the sky, and the king's holy light. He reminded Xebec that this was what the king and the church had always taught, and declared that the drought was punishment because the people had been unfaithful to the doctrines of the church. He added that if the soil had been made rich, then it was someone's blessing, and if a drought had come, then it was someone's sin. According to him, those sinners had to be punished, while those who had contributed to making the soil fertile should be rewarded with land. He claimed he was doing all of this in order to save the people. Finally, with a mocking tone, he told Xebec that if he wanted to go against his orders and save them, he was free to try, before walking away with arrogance. Later in the evening, Xebec returned quietly to where Safia was being held. His thoughts were heavy as he admitted to himself that in the end, he could not endure what was happening. He remembered the young master's words and felt a bitter truth in them, whispering in his heart that it was useless even if the heralds came now. As Xebec moved through the desolate place, he suddenly felt cold steel press against the back of his neck. A voice warned him not to move or turn around, threatening to cut him down on the spot if he disobeyed. Xebec froze and thought to himself that the man's sword technique was ghost-like, appearing so suddenly in such an empty place. He then asked cautiously if the man was truly a herald. The stranger confirmed that he was and asked Xebec in return if he was a knight or perhaps a rescuer. Xebec answered firmly that he was Xebec, a holy knight of the king's church. The man then remarked that he had only asked out of curiosity, but wondered aloud what it would mean if a holy knight of the church tried to form a contract with the Herald clan. He said it would be quite an amusing sight. Xebec clenched his teeth in anger and demanded to know if the man was trying to humiliate him. The stranger ignored his anger and glanced toward the lifeless body of Safia. He declared that the dead woman had been his contractor, but since she was already dead, he had received a free gold coin from her failed contract. He then asked what exactly was going on. Xebec, holding his pride, told him that if he sheathed his sword and kept a distance, then he would place his honor on the line and explain the situation. The man moved back with such incredible speed that Xebec could barely believe his eyes, wondering if this phantom-like speed was even human. Sheathing his sword, the man smirked and remarked that Xebec seemed confident he would not have been defeated easily unless caught off guard by an ambush. He then said it was fine, and that if Xebec truly was a holy knight of the king's church, then at least he must have the courage to stand his ground. Xebec looked at the man with suspicion and asked what his name was and what his rank as a herald was, reminding him that he had already introduced himself as Xebec from the king's church. The man calmly replied that he was Azadin of the 108 Spirits, the emperor's herald. Hearing this, Xebec thought to himself that the 108 Spirits was known to be the lowest rank of the herald clan, but the swift and ghost-like movement Azadin had shown earlier proved that he was far from ordinary. Azadin then demanded that, as promised, Xebec should tell him what had happened. After Zebek explained the entire story, an owl appeared from the shadows and landed on Azadin's shoulder. The owl spoke in a cold, mocking tone, saying that Azadin had responded to the request, but the requester was already dead, so it seemed he had earned some free gold coins. The owl ordered Azadin of the 108 spirits to move on immediately and complete the next mission without rest. Zebek clenched his teeth in anger and questioned Azadin if he was truly going to accept a reward and leave just because the requester had died. Azadin looked at him with curiosity and asked if he really wanted the request to be fulfilled, calling it strange and warning him that his master would suffer because of such choices. Zebek, burning with righteous fury, raised his sword toward Azadin and declared that such a fate would never happen because he would defeat the unholy and soulless one standing before him. Azadin looked at Zebek with a faint, almost sorrowful smile and said that it was sad to think Zebek wanted to shed his blood with a sword that had remained silent before so much injustice. He asked Zebek if he knew the constellations of the night sky, their names, and the myths woven around them. He explained that humans could all look at the same stars but feel something completely different. For some, a star might appear as the hero of a myth, while to others it was nothing more than a faint, fragile light flickering in the darkness. He compared this to the way soldiers saw suffering differently. Zebek lowered his gaze with guilt and admitted that for him, it was not different. He confessed that he could not do anything when tragedy unfolded before him, and as a knight of the king's church he was bound to revere those who carried the bloodline of the divine king. His voice trembled with shame, knowing his duty but also his helplessness. Azadin then sighed and said that he did not wish to fight Zebek. He told him that if Zebek truly felt pity for the girl who had suffered, then his sword was not Azadin's enemy. With a quiet strength, Azadin bent down and lifted the lifeless bodies of Safiya and her fiancé into his arms, treating them with care despite the battlefield around them. He turned to Zebek and asked if he had a shovel. Zebek, startled by the gesture, asked if Azadin was going to bury them. Azadin nodded and said that he would hold a funeral for them. Zebek's thoughts grew dark as he remembered Kozul's cruelty. Kozul wished for the dead to be hung on trees, their bodies turned into undead abominations that screamed in endless agony. Such horrifying displays were nothing but a way for Kozul to reaffirm his power. To bury the corpses instead of leaving them for such a fate was an act that almost felt like openly challenging him. Yet despite this danger, Zebek and Azadin worked together in silence and buried the bodies with their own hands. When the graves were ready, Azadin placed the bodies inside gently and bowed his head in prayer. He called upon the Archangel of Wisdom, Courage, and Mercy to have mercy on the souls of the departed. Zebek stared in surprise, unable to believe what he was hearing, and asked why a man from the Herald clan was reciting the prayers of the rescuer's order. Azadin calmly admitted that he admired their ideology. He said he was reckless and brazen enough to abandon the destiny of his own blood clan in order to serve the faith others called heresy, because if he did not uphold what he believed to be right, then his life would have no meaning. Zebek, curious, asked him what he liked about the rescuer's order. But before Azadin could answer, his expression shifted and he gripped his arch tightly. He warned Zebek that from the nearby direction an individual whom Zebek revered was approaching. Moments later, the young master arrived, leading a force of soldiers. His lips curled into a smirk as he mocked Zebek. He said that if Zebek had liked that formal woman, he should have told him earlier, because she had been beautiful for nothing more than a countryside commoner. Zebek's heart sank when he realized the young master had figured out that he had taken care of the girl. His eyes quickly scanned the area and counted nearly 20 heavily armed soldiers gathered around the young master. The weight of the situation pressed on him heavily, and he thought bitterly that even for him, there was no chance of winning against such overwhelming numbers. The battle suddenly became fierce as Azadin drew his bow and shot an arrow straight into the eye of one of the soldiers. The others froze in shock, unable to believe what they had just seen. Zebek could hardly believe it himself and thought in astonishment that Azadin had managed to hit a soldier standing all the way at the far end under such dangerous circumstances. Without a moment's hesitation, Azadin knocked another arrow and let it fly. Zebek watched in disbelief as the arrow curved through the air like a live snake and pierced through the soldier's shield as if the shield had no power to stop it. Afterward, Azadin finally returned to their earlier conversation. He explained that in answer to Zebek's question about what he liked about the rescuer's order, he admired their belief that a person's worth should not be measured by their birth or family, but by their beliefs and actions. He pointed his bow toward the young master and said that just because someone was born with the blood of the divine king did not make them noble, especially if that person raped and massacred innocent people. His words carried a weight that cut deeper than any sword. The battlefield erupted with fury as the young master shouted angrily, cursing Zebek and ordering him to kill Azadin. Azadin leapt high into the air, moving with incredible speed, and released arrows that struck many soldiers in the eyes. Shock and chaos spread among the troops instantly. The young master, gritting his teeth in frustration, realized that Azadin's goal was not to kill the soldiers but to permanently disable them. Furious and confused, he shouted at Azadin, demanding to know who he was. Calmly, Azadin introduced himself as a herald. Without hesitation, he closed the distance and slammed a powerful punch into the young master's face, sending him crashing to the ground. Holding his sword with deadly precision, Azadin warned that he had already reduced the soldiers' numbers with his arrows, and if the young master was brave enough, he could face him directly. Zebek watched the scene in disbelief, thinking to himself that Azadin seemed obsessed with disabling and punishing rather than killing, and that such behavior bordered on madness. Soon all the soldiers lay on the ground, injured and drenched in blood. Azadin walked slowly toward the young master and accused him of waiting too long to face justice, calling him trash for inflicting pain on innocent people. With a sudden flash, he used a powerful bright light magic that blinded the young master. When the young master tried to cover his face, Azadin declared that this magic was proof that noble blood, incomparable to the young master's, flowed within him. In a swift, terrifying move, he used his sword to rip out one of the young master's eyes. The young master screamed in pain, asking in horror what Azadin had done to him, unable to comprehend the full extent of his defeat and punishment. Azadin looked at the young master with a smirk and asked if he was mentally challenged, because he still did not understand what had just happened to him. The young master panicked and begged, asking what Azadin wanted. He promised to give anything, boasting that he was a descendant of the sacred Yegas's holy family. Azadin gripped the young master by his hair and told him coldly that it was unfortunate for him, because Azadin was a slayer of sanctity, a true herald, and not someone who could be bribed or intimidated. Desperate, the young master shouted for help to Zebek, but Zebek could not see through the chaos and blood covering the battlefield. Azadin then spoke thoughtfully, saying that he thought the young master would continue living with vigor and that this was the right attitude, to live positively. He added that the young master would especially need that mindset after everything that had happened. Without hesitation, Azadin struck him hard again, sending him crashing to the ground. Holding himself above the defeated young master, Azadin remarked that he did not have a contractor to answer to, but he had been considerate in carrying out justice. He concluded that in this way the emperor's law had been fulfilled, leaving no doubt that Azadin's power and judgment had prevailed completely. Zebek held his sword firmly and declared that he was a knight of the Church of the King. He said he could not ignore Azadin even if Azadin claimed to act righteously or perform good deeds. Zebek insisted that he had a duty to stop him. Azadin, however, spoke with confidence and told Zebek that the other knights of the Church of the King were nothing more than scoundrels who had been forcefully expelled from their homes over matters of inheritance. He asked Zebek if he could truly follow him and said that perhaps fate would bring them together again. Then, without warning, Azadin vanished into the air. Zebek thought about how nobody had been able to kill Azadin of the Herald clan, and he realized that their battles always left permanent losses. He reflected on Azadin's words about scoundrels expelled from their homes and understood that this description applied to himself as well. In that moment, he felt a heavy burden lift from his chest, as if a weight had been removed. The scene then shifted to the palace, where a man knelt in front of the Margrave and pleaded for mercy. He begged the Margrave to exempt the people from taxes that year. He explained that many people were fleeing and becoming nomads, while those who had starved to death wandered the streets as undead. The man spoke of how the land had been overrun with thieves and monsters and apologized, saying that the people could not afford to pay taxes under such circumstances. Margrave Kazel had expressed anger at the villagers, calling them shameless and warning that if they continued to beg they might soon ask for rations as well. He said that nothing could change the lowly blood that ran through them, but he added that he could provide relief on one strict condition. If they failed to meet his request, all of them would be hanged. For a moment, the hall fell silent as everyone felt the weight of his words. Then, with fire burning in his hand, the Margrave spoke again, trying to calm them. He explained that what they were asking for was nothing more than a single page of a grimoire, and that the grimoire would respond to anyone who truly wished for it and reveal itself. He promised that if the villagers could bring him a grimoire like this, he would exempt their village from taxes for 3 years and also provide 50 bushels each of wheat, barley, and oats. One of the villagers asked politely if they at least needed to know the name of the grimoire in order to search for it properly. Just then, a snake entered the hall and transformed into a woman, speaking with a sharp tone. She said that mentioning the name of the book had been rather careless, Count. Margrave Kazal dismissed the concern of the snake woman and said it was nonsense, pointing out that everyone was already searching across the land for the grimoire. He explained that rumors about the book would spread across the continent no matter what, so it would be wiser to find even a single page before others could. Then he asked the snake woman what she had to say. The snake woman, in her human form, replied that she was obliged to inform him that his son had fallen victim in the eastern part of the continent at the hands of someone named Sir Kazal. Margrave immediately interrupted, saying that Kazal's forces would not be defeated so easily, and that Sir Zabek was with him as well. The snake woman explained that their opponents were from the Herald clan, and she added that they too were likely after the Book of the Divine King. She said that if the Herald clan wished to free themselves from the curse of their duty, they would need the grimoire. Margrave thought to himself, questioning whether Kazal was dead. The snake woman then told him that she had heard Kazal had lost sight in both eyes and that his reproductive organs were damaged, and she asked what he would do. Margrave ordered that soldiers be sent to their location to kill the Herald clan. The snake woman acknowledged his command and said that she would make contact with the commander to carry out the order. The scene shifted to Azadin, who realized he was in trouble and said that things were bad. He complained that he would die of thirst at this rate and scolded the foolish spirit for putting on a show and claiming he could finish in 2 days. The owl reacted angrily, asking how he dared to speak so disrespectfully to the emperor's messenger. Azadin explained honestly that since the emperor had died without making any plans, he and the other heralds were now despised by people all over the world. He said they were called slayers of sanctity and soulless heretics. On top of that, because of the owl's show, he had to abandon any luggage he had been carrying and run as fast as he could to the contractors. He was so thirsty that he felt he could die, and the only food he had left was dry goods that he might not even be able to digest, which could lead to starvation as well. Suddenly, Azadin sensed something strange, drew his sword and saw many souls around him. One of the souls spoke, saying that the land had neither the light of the king's virtue nor the blessing of the archangels, and that it was not good to stay there for long. Azadin told them that he had repaid their grudges and asked them to move on to the afterlife. Then he noticed a well and walked toward it, asking the souls if they meant to give him water, saying that they did not have to, and could have just gone to rest. He pulled out a basket eagerly, hoping to drink, but to his disappointment, there was no water inside, only sand and some paper drawings. The history of the Herald clan, who were originally a race called Aragasa. They had crossed a massive typhoon from another continent and arrived on the Wibris continent. At that time, the continent was ruled by the 8 divine kings of the Yegas family, each holding one of the 8 thrones. However, during that era, one person from the Yeslat family managed to take control of all 8 thrones, leaving the other 7 holy kings, who were brothers, under his control and subjugated. The emperor, Yaslat, wanted to remove all traces of the deceased holy kings and their influence from the continent. Meanwhile, the Aragasa, as outsiders, were searching for land to settle on. The emperor made a deal with them. He gave them a powerful grimoire called the Song of the Yellow Bird and a spirit known as the Emperor's Voice. In return, the Aragasa signed a contract with the emperor and became his heralds. From that moment, their hands were stained with blood, as they became the emperor's sword, agent, and executioner. They personally carried out the punishment of wicked nobles who disobeyed the emperor's laws and gained power. This was considered the most horrifying sin by the citizens of Wibris, as they deeply believed in the afterlife and the cycle of eternal life. Eventually, the emperor died, and the empire was divided again into 8 separate kingdoms. The Aragasa, who had served as the emperor's heralds, became hated by the people of Wibris. They were called the soulless heralds because of the atrocities they had committed. However, the heralds faced a problem they could not escape. The contract they had signed with the emperor was still in effect, and even after the emperor's death, they were bound to continue serving as his heralds. This left them trapped in a role they could not abandon, forever carrying the burden of their actions and the title of soulless servants of a dead emperor. Later, Azadin found a piece of paper and realized it was very important. He held it and wondered if it was a page from the Book of the Divine King and if it was the source of the emperor's power. He asked himself if collecting it could finally allow him to escape the curse of duty that bound him to the emperor's service. Owl, who was with him, reminded Azadin that it was not a curse but an honorable duty under the contract they had signed with the emperor. Azadin felt that fate had deliberately placed the page in his hands and muttered that destiny was not something to take lightly. Owl noticed that Azadin did not seem happy and asked him if he was not pleased, since what he held was what all heralds desired. To fulfill their service contract, collect 100,000 gold coins and obtain the Book of the Divine King, which would finally free them from the burden of duty. Azzedine admitted that while this was the ultimate goal of all heralds, he was worried. He explained that the reason the book had been torn apart in the past was because of his father, and now he feared that the situation might be spreading throughout the world. Nearby, a girl named Midiam was hiding behind a stone and whispered to herself that Azzedine was the son of the clan's worst traitor. She thought he was talentless, powerless, and foolish, and she doubted whether he could really use magic as the rumors said, or if he was truly cursed. A boy sitting beside her added that he was not sure about the curse, but he knew for certain that Azzedine could not use magic. Midiam mentioned that she had heard Azzedine wet the bed until he was 8 years old and could not even tie a bowstring. She doubted that he would ever be able to carry out the duties of a herald and suggested testing his skills to see if he was really capable. Ishmael reminded her that Azzedine was a student of the strict elder Khazas and that there was always a possibility for improvement in any situation. However, Midiam dismissed his argument, saying that no matter how skilled Khazas was, a fool was still a fool, even if trained for 10 or 100 years. She thought that it was ridiculous that the son of a traitor, who could not use magic, had become a herald, while capable people like her could not. Then, Midiam tried to attack Azzedine by shooting an arrow at him and hiding behind a stone for safety. After some time, she sneaked out from her hiding spot, but a stone hit her forehead. When she looked up, she saw Azzedine standing in front of her. He asked if she was the one who had shot the arrow. Midiam was shocked because she had not sensed his presence at all and realized that he might have caught the arrows she had shot in midair or had them stored in his quiver. Azzedine then asked for their names. Midiam introduced herself as Midiam from Ether, and the boy said he was Ishmael. They explained that they were assistants who had come to support and assist Azzedine. Azzedine spoke firmly that it seemed like they had applied to be his assistants because staying in the Holy Land was boring. He told them to go home, explaining that bloodlines did not matter to heralds and that anyone who came to work for him would now be his subordinates. He also warned them about shooting arrows at him, suggesting that if they wanted to test what happened when someone acted so recklessly outside the Holy Land, he could teach them a lesson. Midiam, watching him, thought that he was very different from the rumors she had heard. She wondered if he was really the weak and foolish person others had made fun of and bullied. Azzedine then asked Midiam to apologize for her rudeness and told her that if she wanted anything from him, she had to show respect, either as a member of Aragasa or as his enemy. Midiam clenched her teeth and apologized, introducing herself properly as Midiam from Ether and acknowledging that she was an Aragasa. Azzedine accepted her apology but gave her a warning. He said she must never shoot arrows at anyone unless she intended to kill, and that weapons were not to be played with outside of the Holy Land. He made it clear that he did not need assistance and told them to return. Despite this, Midiam thought that he was nothing like the rumors. He was strong, intelligent, and proud. She realized that just because he was powerful, she could not let that stop her from challenging him. She decided to test herself and her abilities, and officially declared that she challenged Azzedine for his position as a herald. Azzedine rubbed his hair with a restless look and said that Arael had been a bad influence on those kids. He reminded Midiam that if he won, she would take over his position, but he warned her to think about what would happen if he ended up winning instead. Midiam answered firmly that she already knew the outcome, and she declared that everything that was hers would belong to him if she lost. She assured him that she was fully prepared for such a result. Azzedine thought to himself that while Arael was a problem, the bigger issue was that Midiam was clearly underestimating him. He then told her that she should give up before it became too late, and he reminded her that only Ariel could hope to win against a herald. He admitted that he did not have the best reputation, but he also stressed that he had not been given his position for nothing. Midiam ignored his words and instead stepped back until there were 100 steps of distance between them. She then declared loudly that she was challenging Azzedine to a duel. Immediately, a spiritual voice echoed and confirmed that the duel had been validated, addressing Azzedine as herald and asking him to accept the challenge. Azzedine grew uneasy and thought that the Emperor's voice was the spirit assigned to each herald, and since it had now witnessed the event, refusing Midiam's challenge was no longer possible. He realized that the situation was bad for him because the duel had now become official, and there was no turning back. Later, after the fierce fight had ended, Ishmael stood in shock as he tried to understand what had just happened. He thought about the technique Azzedine had used during the battle. It was clearly an archery technique suited for the battlefield, one that sacrificed accuracy in order to increase the speed of the projectile. Ishmael recognized it as an extreme form of the Aragasa technique, and this confused him deeply because he had believed that Azzedine could not use magic. But during the duel, Azzedine had displayed the beauty of nature's yellow crane technique, which clearly contained magic, and Ishmael could not understand how that was possible. At the same time, he felt a strange satisfaction because his earlier prediction about the fight had turned out to be correct. The duel between Azzedine and Midian began with tension in the air. Midian charged forward with fierce determination and shouted that she had finally caught him. With one clean strike, she appeared to slash Azzedine's body into 2 pieces. For a moment it seemed as if she had won, but suddenly his figure vanished like smoke. Ishmael, who had been watching from the side, shouted in alarm and warned her to look behind. In that instant, Azzedine appeared right behind Midian and slammed his fist into her body with a crushing blow. He declared that it was over as Midian was thrown down hard onto the ground, defeated. The Emperor's voice then echoed through the battlefield announcing that the duel had ended. It declared that Midian of Ether had challenged Azzedine's position as Herald but had lost, and therefore her fate now belonged to Herald Azzedine. The voice continued by addressing Ishmael as well, stating that because he had interfered during the duel, his fate also became tied to Azzedine, making him property of the Herald alongside Midian. Both of them were stunned and shaken by this merciless judgment. In despair, Midian attempted to take her own life, unwilling to accept the humiliation of defeat. But Azzedine quickly stopped her with a spell. He told her in a calm yet sharp tone that, as someone who had lost the duel, she no longer had even the right to die on her own terms. He explained that she could only die when he himself died or when he permitted it. He asked her if she had truly challenged him to a duel without even knowing such rules, and then told her that this should be enough of a lesson. To their shock, he added that he would release both her and Ishmael. Midian and Ishmael stared at him in disbelief, unable to understand why he would let them go after gaining absolute control over them. Azzedine told them that they should pretend the duel had never happened, because if the event was officially recorded, it would bring great shame and damage to their futures. With those words, he turned and walked away. Even so, the two still followed him from behind, unable to accept being abandoned so easily. Azzedine looked back once more and told them firmly that he did not need slaves, reminding them that he had already granted them freedom. He advised them to return to the sanctuary instead of trailing after him, making it clear that he wanted no followers bound to him by force. Midian, still unable to understand his actions, shouted in frustration and asked why he would release her so easily. She cried out that he had just gained a beautiful and talented young girl as his slave, yet he was simply letting her go as if it meant nothing. Azzedine looked at her with a teasing expression and replied that he was not so sure about the part where she called herself beautiful. He told her that if she had truly been as talented as Arel, then she would not have lost the duel in the first place. He continued by saying that there were plenty of men in the world who liked younger girls, and there were also many cultures where early marriages were common. For that reason, he warned her that it would be wise to think carefully before ever proposing a duel again. He added more seriously that, in truth, she should never challenge anyone to a duel in the future. If there ever came a time when she truly needed to kill someone, then she should do it quietly, by assassination, instead of putting her life and freedom at risk in a reckless public fight. Ishmael stood in silence, staring at Azzedine with disbelief, unable to process how casually he dismissed the victory, the rules, and even the ownership of 2 lives. His thoughts were heavy, and he could not understand Azzedine's reasoning. Midian, on the other hand, looked at him with sudden excitement rather than anger. Her eyes lit up as she said that this way of thinking was something new to her, the contract of service. Long ago, it was a sacred agreement between the Emperor and the Aragasa clan. The contract stated that the Emperor and the clan would provide each other with what they needed, and any member who betrayed this bond would suffer a horrific death. In the beginning, this contract was a symbol of loyalty and an honor that showed the deep bond between ruler and servant. But everything changed after the Emperor died. Even in death, the power of the contract did not disappear. Instead, it twisted into a dreadful curse that continued to bind the Aragasa clan. The once honorable agreement became an eternal chain of servitude, forcing the clan to remain as the Emperor's heralds, bound to a master who no longer lived. For many generations it seemed like the Aragasa clan was trapped in an endless cycle of service. Yet a change finally appeared when the Herald clan became involved in the Terasser Kingdom's succession war. With their intervention, the Aragasa clan secured victory for their side. As a reward, they managed to obtain a copy of the legendary Book of the Divine King, a treasure that could have changed everything. However, their triumph was short-lived. The book was stolen by a traitor within their own ranks, a man named Akra. The clan used threats and all kinds of methods to force Akra to return what he had stolen, but their efforts failed. Their hopes were shattered when Akra scattered the pages of the book across the dangerous and mysterious World Mountain Range, making it impossible to recover the complete text. Because of this betrayal, Akra became the first person to suffer death from the curse of the contract. His punishment was unnatural and terrifying within his male body. He gave birth to twins, a fate no human could endure. From this cursed birth came Azadin and Ariel, the twin siblings. Ironically, although both were born of the same curse, their paths were very different. Ariel grew up to become the strongest herald in the entire history of the clan, a figure of unmatched talent and power. Azadin, on the other hand, became the subject of whispers and ridicule. He was called a fool by many within the clan, his reputation overshadowed completely by his sister's brilliance. Now when Azadin once again told them to stop following him, Miriam quickly replied that they were not following him at all. Instead, she handed him a letter and explained that they only had something to deliver. The letter, she said, was from the regional head of Salasma. Azadin opened the message and read its contents. In his mind, he brushed aside the scolding about his missed reports, focusing instead on the important order written inside. The letter mentioned that copies of the Book of the Divine King had recently started appearing, and he was instructed to retrieve them. It also warned him that this task would affect his performance review. Azadin thought to himself that if it was written in the letter, then the other heralds must already know about the copies as well. He then spoke aloud, saying that the letter confirmed copies of the Divine King's book were appearing, and he asked Miriam if she already knew about this. Miriam nodded in agreement, confirming she was aware. After that, Azadin said that he needed to travel to Salasma in order to meet the regional head in person, and thanked her for delivering the letter to him. Miriam, however, suggested that since they were already heading toward the same destination, they might as well travel together. She added that she could also tell him about what had been happening inside the clan. Azadin considered her words, then replied that the road did not belong to him alone, so she and Ishmael were free to follow him if they wished. The three of them continued their journey side by side. As they walked, Azadin noticed something up ahead and told them that there was a spring nearby. They moved toward the spring, grateful for the chance to drink and rest. But just as they began to collect water, a man suddenly shouted angrily, demanding to know who had given them permission to take water from his spring. Azadin faced the armed men without fear. He calmly told them that he had no intention of fighting and asked what they wanted in return. The leader of the group rested his sword on his shoulder and answered with a mocking smile, saying that he wanted all of them. Azadin, still composed, asked again to make sure if there was truly no room for compromise. The men surrounding them laughed with arrogance. One of them sneered at Azadin, saying that he had a lot of nerve for someone from the ground, then mocked his mask and asked if he was a clown. The tension rose quickly when their leader shouted an order to capture the girl alive and kill the men. With that, the group rushed forward to attack. Moments later, however, the tables turned. The battle ended with all of the attackers lying on the ground wounded and crying out for mercy. They pleaded desperately, explaining that they had only just been conscripted and were not true bandits. They revealed that Margrave Kazel's children were forcing people to be drafted against their will, sending them everywhere to search for a copy of some book. They insisted that by chance they had encountered someone as noble as Azadin and begged to be spared. Miriam clenched the hilt of her sword tightly, suspicion burning in her eyes. She spoke coldly, questioning if they were merely thieves inventing excuses to save themselves. She added that regardless, killing them might be necessary to silence them and prevent future trouble. But before she could act, Azadin stopped her. He said firmly that he did not kill without reason and that everyone deserved a second chance. His words caused the injured men to brighten with hope, their fear slowly turning into relief. Ishmael, meanwhile, stood in silence, shocked by what he was witnessing. He thought to himself that he had often seen people who refused to kill, but he had never expected to encounter such a person among the Herald clan, who were known for their merciless reputation. Azadin suddenly struck one of the attackers with a powerful punch. He observed the blow calmly and said that it had been a clean shot that destroyed the man's eye. He then turned to the others and warned Miriam and Ishmael not to move carelessly, saying that even one wrong step could cause their faces to be blown apart. Azadin told the defeated enemies that he would spare their lives, but only after leaving them with permanent injuries, so that even if they failed to repent, they would no longer have the strength to harm others. His words chilled the men, who trembled as fear filled their eyes while Azadin continued to beat them with controlled precision. Later, the injured men stumbled away, clutching their wounds and cursing Azadin under their breath for the humiliation they had suffered. But their bitter words did not last long. Out of nowhere, a massive shadow loomed over them. A giant hand suddenly reached down and ripped the face of one man clean from his body in a single, horrifying motion. The other men screamed, but the giant captured them all with ease. he placed their broken bodies into a huge basket strapped to his back and declared in a booming voice that they were now portable food. He introduced himself as Goldu and claimed them as his property. Goldu then turned his monstrous head toward the distance and spotted a human village. An evil grin spread across his face as he muttered in delight about the fortress-like settlement, imagining the countless people within. To him, it was not a village but a feast waiting to happen. He spoke with excitement, calling it big and strong, full of meat everywhere, his eyes shining with hunger and cruelty. As the three of them walked after the skirmish, Miriam smiled and admitted that at first she had thought Azadin was simply going easy on the attackers. She confessed that his methods had surprised her, but now she realized it was not a bad tactic. They had even managed to retrieve all of the weapons from the defeated men. Azadin replied calmly, saying that it was hard for someone to truly understand others without having been in the same situation. He explained that losing an eye had bigger consequences than most would think. The men who once attacked and victimized others in their raids were now left with fear of being weak themselves, and this fear could give them a chance to repent for their past actions. Ishmael spoke next, telling Azadin that not only had he spared those men, but he had also given them a chance to cleanse their souls. Azadin nodded and then reminded them of something important. He said that the men had revealed Margrave Kazal was searching for a copy of the Book of the Divine King. Ishmael, surprised by this, pointed out that Margrave Kazal had lost in the succession fight. He wondered aloud if perhaps the Margrave was now attempting to climb back up in power by using the book to gain magical strength. Azadin considered this and answered that a political figure desperate to gain power through such means was dangerous. He then said that for now he would need to remove his mask since it clearly revealed him as a herald. Until they made it safely out of Margrave Kazal's territory, they would have to move carefully. With that, Azadin slowly lifted the mask from his face. Miriam's eyes widened in shock as she shouted in disbelief. She exclaimed that Azadin did not have eyes at all. She could not understand how he had managed to fight, move, and act without any struggle despite being unable to see. Azadin responded to Miriam's shocked question that he did not know the reason himself, but ever since he was born, he had simply been able to see without having eyes. Miriam studied his face and remarked in her own strange way that he looked as though he had once been very handsome, only to later suffer an unfortunate accident where he lost his eyes. She added bluntly that she thought scars like his were better than having a handsome face with ugly eyes. Ishmael immediately interrupted her, scolding her and saying that she was being very rude with her words. Azadin, however, stayed calm. He told Miriam that she had said almost the exact same thing as the person who had given him the wound on his face. Curious, she asked him who had done it. Azadin answered that it had been Arel. In his thoughts, he remembered her cold words. She had told him that it was strange for him not to have something that should naturally be there. She claimed that if she left a scar across his face, then at least others could imagine that he once had eyes where they should have been. With that cruel reasoning, she had sliced his face, leaving behind the scar that marked him. The mood grew heavier, but the group continued onward with their luggage carried on the back of an ox. As evening came, they reached a massive gate that led into a castle town. Ishmael looked at the sight ahead and pointed out that he could see the gates, but the line of people waiting to pass through was very long. Azadin observed the familiar place and said that it had been a long time since he had last stood here at the gateway to the East Village. Miriam looked at the bustling village and added that it was also the place where the Imperial Road began. She asked with a smile if he agreed that it was a pretty good starting point for their journey. As they approached the crowded gate, Azadin told Miriam and Ishmael to stay quiet. He said sharply that he was a pilgrim on a solo pilgrimage, and they were just some kids who happened to join him on the way. At the gate, guards were checking every traveler thoroughly, searching through their belongings and taking things away. Miriam frowned with anger and muttered that the guards were basically stealing from the people. Azadin observed the scene carefully and thought that the guards were not simply robbing but searching for something important. He guessed that their inspection was too thorough to be random. Soon a man whispered to Azadin that the guards were looking for copies of the divine book. Azadin realized that this could become troublesome to deal with. Just then, a commotion broke out nearby. A traveler shouted angrily about his money being taken, but a guard struck him hard in the face. A young girl in the crowd shouted that stealing was wrong and demanded the guard give it back. The guard sneered and told her that anyone who dared to talk back was asking for a beating. When the man resisted again, the guard hit him even harder, knocking him unconscious on the ground. Ishmael watched with tension and asked Azadin if they should step in and fight, but before Azadin could respond, a loud alarm spread through the guards. They shouted that an ogre had been spotted nearby. The guards immediately closed the gates to protect the inside of the village. The crowd outside panicked, shouting desperately for the gates to be opened before the monster reached them. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the inner grounds near a row of carriages. A boy stood there, asking his men if they had locked everything properly. He was Tarkiev, one of Margrave Kozul's children. A soldier answered that everything had been secured, and Tarkiev climbed onto a carriage to prepare for departure. Another soldier stepped forward and asked what their orders were. Tarkiev ordered them to fend off the ogre and any other monsters that approached, saying that they had been trained well enough to handle such threats. The soldier hesitated and then pleaded with him, saying that at the very least they should allow the people outside to come inside the gates. He volunteered to take command of the defense himself while Tarkiev retreated. Tarkiev smirked and mocked him, saying he was not even a knight, so what could he possibly do? Still, with a hint of sarcasm, Tarkiev agreed and told him he could take responsibility, then ordered his carriage to leave. As Tarkiev departed, the soldier remained behind. He clenched his fists and thought grimly that the ground itself was starting to shake, a sure sign that the ogre was drawing closer. In the night, a woman had told Ishmael that the road ahead would be rougher and asked him to guide his younger sister and uncle carefully. She had handed him an extra lantern and asked him to hold on to it. Ishmael had nodded, understanding the responsibility he was given. Meanwhile, Azadin had thought that people seemed to act much nicer when he pretended to be blind, noticing how their behavior changed around him. Suddenly, a soldier had shouted that the knights and mercenaries had left, but he reminded everyone that it was important to protect the village. He had asked those who could fight to stay and help defend the village, while others could provide support. The soldier had also said that their efforts would help the injured and elderly flee a little faster, giving them a chance to escape the danger. Miriam had clenched her teeth in anger and said she could not believe that the knights, who were supposed to serve the people, were abandoning their own. She had called it disgraceful, pathetic, and unsightly. Azadin had observed that even though the knights were from Webris, instead of truly helping their people, they seemed to consider casting them out as a noble or wonderful act. Miriam had reluctantly agreed, saying it was unusual for an Aragasian to sympathize with the people of Webris. After this, Azadin had suggested that they part ways there, and he had vanished into the air, leaving the others behind. In the castle, many people had stood holding weapons, facing a group of ogres that threatened them. One of the ogres had killed a man and introduced himself as Goldu, saying that they stored meat and would eat for a very long time. The people had reacted quickly, throwing arrows at the ogre in an attempt to stop him. Another to attack. One ogre had begun striking and a man had shouted for everyone to protect the gate and shoot the enemies near them. Despite their efforts, the ogres had attacked the gate using stones and other weapons. One ogre had stood holding fire in his hand and had claimed that the Book of the Divine King was near. At that moment, Azadin had jumped on the ogre and killed him, then told the people that he would help defend the gate. One of the defenders had asked who he was, and Azadin had replied that he was just a passing herald of the emperor. The people had looked shocked at his answer. Azadin had then jumped down and destroyed the eyes of several ogres, shooting arrows at them while sitting on the head of one of the monsters. One particularly terrifying ogre, which had many mouths, had shouted that the Book of the Divine King would make him the King of the Fang. Azadin had looked at him carefully and thought that the ogre would be a difficult opponent to deal with. Azadin and the ogre stood facing each other. Azadin said that Godkin Kurt was the King of the Fang. One of the ogres threw a beam of light at Azadin, but it did not affect him. Then the ogre commanded the servants of Yagas to hand him the Book of the Divine King, threatening that if they did not, he would kill them quickly and without pain. While the ogre was speaking, Azadin shot an arrow at him, but the ogre managed to dodge it. Azadin wondered what the strange light had been and whether it had been pointing him toward the Book of the Divine King. He also questioned why the ogres were searching so desperately for copies of the book. All the ogres began attacking Azadin, forcing him to run. He drew his sword and started slashing through the attacking ogres, cutting them into pieces. While fighting, he thought that the fangs were too big for their own bodies and that shallow-rooted fangs were weak. As he ran toward Godkin, Azadin considered that he might be working at a loss by risking himself without even receiving any gold coins. Suddenly, arrows shot by people standing on the castle pillars hit Godkin. One of the men shouted that they had to fire now and help the Herald clan member no matter what. They launched many arrows at the ogres, trying to protect both Azadin and Godkin from the deadly attack. Azadin smiled and said that he would get started too. Suddenly, he attacked Godkin by throwing fangs at him, but he also reminded Godkin that they were his own fangs and asked why he was so angry when Azadin was just returning them. With great skill, Azadin used the fangs to kill many of the attacking ogres. After a while taking a deep breath, he said that it was finally over. Just then people from the castle shouted at him, calling him a soulless heathen. Azadin turned around and saw that they were pointing their bows at him, and he thought that they were very rude and that they might make a mistake and accidentally fire at him. One of the men shouted and asked what he was planning and why he had eradicated all those monsters. Another man shouted that it was strange for monsters to appear out of nowhere and that no matter how one looked at it, it was weird. He added that it was all the fault of the ominous heathen. Azadin looked at them silently, not answering as he tried to understand their sudden hostility and confusion. Azadin said that he did not know why a monster had appeared either. He explained that, as everyone knew, he only fulfilled his duties according to the emperor's golden coin, and that someone had actually used one coin to make a wish for the people. The people looked shocked and asked if it was one of them who had done it. Azadin replied that he was not obligated to tell them, nor did he have the authority to do so. He asked if he could pass now or if they would fight him for the king's church, despite having been raided by the noble's child and abandoned. One man shouted, warning him not to speak badly of their faith. Azadin acknowledged that they were all faithful citizens, of course, and then he turned to an injured man telling him to be kind, as he had been given a second chance at life. After that, Azadin jumped onto a pillar and grabbed a few arrows, joking that it was fine to just take a few. The man thanked him, and Azadin then jumped into the air to move away from danger. Later, as he was running, he spoke to an owl, saying that he was tired. He thought that running all the way here had been exhausting enough, and fighting without receiving the golden coin made it even more difficult. While catching his breath, he saw a group led by Ishmael. Ishmael shouted that Azadin had arrived, clearly relieved and happy to see him. After Azadin told Ishmael and Midiam about everything that had happened with the ogres and the fight at the castle, Ishmael scolded him, saying that he had wasted his energy because he did not even receive a golden coin for all his effort. Azadin explained calmly that Midiam had once told him that helping and protecting people was a beautiful thing, and that life was not fun without some sense of aesthetics. He wanted to show that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than rewards. Then he asked if they had escaped safely and whether the evacuees had allowed them to go. Midiam explained that at first the people had tried to stop them, but after they promised to defeat the weaker monsters, the evacuees had let them pass without trouble. Ishmael commented that the people had been kind and had even given them a torch, although they did not know that they were from Aragasa. Midiam proudly added that it was because she was pretty. Azadin teased her gently, saying that it was not because she was a child, but because she was pretty. Midiam, feeling defensive, shouted while gritting her teeth that she was 13 and reminded him that in the north there was a queen who had married at that same age. Later, Azadin held a stick and asked Midiam if she recognized it. She guessed it was a magic wand, and Azadin confirmed that it had belonged to the Kurt kin. Midiam said that she would have to concentrate very hard to use it because she was low on stamina at the moment, but she was excited and asked if Azadin was acknowledging her as his subordinate. Azadin asked Midiam if she did not think he could ask a favor from a fellow kinsfolk. She replied that then he should do a favor in return. Azadin agreed and said that she could inspect it the next day. Then he jumped onto the stem of a tree. When Midiam asked where he was going, he explained that he needed to hurry and told her to come with him. The scene then shifted to a group of traveling people. One woman noticed Azadin and asked when he had arrived, explaining that the children had been looking for him. Azadin admitted that he had gotten a bit lost, but assured her that the children were smart and would catch up soon. He also mentioned that more importantly, he had heard shouts of victory coming from the village. The woman looked confused, so Azadin, smiling, explained that he had good hearing and thought it would be safe for her to return to the village. He asked if she could reach the children from there using something like lantern signals. An old man then pointed and said that the lanterns by the village gates were on, indicating that the vigilante committee must have succeeded. Azadin told the woman that she should send in a small group of people to check the area first. The woman nodded in agreement. Then, before she could react, Azadin vanished, leaving her confused and asking where he had gone. Meanwhile, as Azadin ran through the forest, he noticed smoke rising in the distance. Curious, he moved closer and saw the campfire of a group of soldiers. One of the soldiers explained that there had been a drought and that an ogre had appeared, but the Margrave was still focused on searching for the Book of the Divine King instead of protecting the people. He said that he thought the place was doomed and that their best option was to complete one big job and leave. He also mentioned that if they were employed for a longer time, it would raise the fees, which he was fine with. Azadin realized that this must be where the fool who had run off was camping. Looking at the soldier's wealth, he thought to himself that he was out of money and that he needed more, since traveling always required a lot of money. Tarkiev was extremely angry because the soldiers he had hired failed in their job. They had been responsible for protecting valuable loot, but the treasure was stolen. Tarkiev shouted at them, questioning their competence and scolding them for their failure. Then Tarkiev turned his attention to a man standing nearby and told him that he would reduce the salaries of the 2 soldiers who had failed. He asked if the man had any complaints about his decision. The man replied calmly that he had no problem with that, but he added something more serious. One of his own possessions had gone missing as well, and he explained that this theft was not ordinary. He warned that the thief, whom he called the little sneaker, would move on to the next village. He urged Tarkiev to use his authority to send soldiers to that village and stop the thief before more damage could happen. Tarkiev reacted with shock and anger. He pointed out that the nearest village was a public stage station, managed by a noble, which would make ordering an attack difficult. He questioned why he had to carry out such an order and accused the man of trying to boss him around. The man, however, only smiled and replied that it did not matter. If Tarkiev refused to act, he would plunder the village in Tarkiev's name anyway. Then, in a sudden and shocking moment, the man stabbed Tarkiev with a dagger. He told the soldiers not to worry, explaining that the dagger was a gift from a witch, which made the attack even more sinister. Immediately, the dagger transformed into a spider and entered Tarkiev's body. Tarkiev screamed in pain, asking what had been done to him, and collapsed to the ground, writhing. The man tried to calm him down. He said that the spider inside Tarkiev's body had only given a small sting and that Tarkiev should not worry too much. However, he warned that Tarkiev had to listen to him carefully. If Tarkiev did not obey, the spider would start laying eggs inside his body. Once the eggs hatched, the consequences would be horrifying. Tarkiev, terrified and angry, shouted at the man, demanding to know what he wanted from him. The man held Tarkiev's shoulder and calmly explained that he intended to plunder the public stage station and capture the thief who had stolen his belongings. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Azadin and his group. Owl woke everyone up at exactly 10:04 a.m. Midiam yawned and asked Azadin if he had always carried 2 staves. Azadin explained that when he had looted the mercenaries' supplies the day before, he had found an extra staff. He said it was the same staff that the goblin shaman had used and asked the group to examine it. Ishmael held the staff and said that he could try, but warned that it might be cursed. Using his power, Ishmael examined the staff and reported seeing a mental image of green and black. Azadin then explained that if the staff belonged to the king of the Fang, the mana would appear red. He suggested that perhaps it belonged to a different Kurt, which raised questions about its origin and the potential danger it carried. Ishmael carefully examined the magical staff that Azadin had found. He said that the staff's function was to search for a specific target and that it was made to point towards something important. He warned that the staff was not very durable and could break easily, but he also noted that its creator must have been very skilled. Even though it seemed to have been made in a hurry, its performance was far better than most magical tools. Azadin thought about this and realized that the staff must have been created to track copies of the Book of the Divine King. He understood that there were probably more staffs like this, which meant he would have to deal with multiple trackers in the future. He then suggested that, for now, they focus on finding those who had lost this particular magical item. Later, Azadin sat on the branch of a tree and carefully observed the soldiers gathered around a campfire. He noticed that their atmosphere had changed overnight. They looked disciplined and organized, clearly preparing for a real battle. Azadin realized that their main purpose must also be to collect the stolen copy of the book. He had expected them to take action after losing the wand, but he was surprised that they had decided to use sheer force to achieve their goal. Midiam, standing beneath the tree, asked Azadin if he could see anything unusual. Azadin replied that the soldiers were planning to attack the next village. Midiam thought about the next village they would have to deal with. He realized that the public stage station village was much larger than an average village. He wondered if the soldiers' extreme actions were reckless or if they had a serious reason to act so desperately. Later, Azadin and his group reached the public stage station. One of the soldiers noticed something unusual and mentioned a blind man, commenting that he could barely see the tread depth lightly. Azadin smiled and thanked him. As they passed through the village gate, Midiam noticed that blind pilgrims were allowed to enter for free, and he remarked that they were taking advantage of this rule by deceiving the villagers. Once inside the village, they walked through the crowded streets. Ishmael pointed out a wagon from Karasar's Peddlers Association. Finally, Midiam expressed relief, saying that they could finally take a break. A man with blonde hair reflected on his past and thought about Araril, who had been called the greatest genius of the clan. He remembered that Errol had become a herald at the age of 3, a fact the adults had told him when he was young. The man recalled that in his own youth, he had learned about Errol's strength and abilities in a harsh way, suffering through a broken ankle. However, he realized that Errol was much more than just a physically strong individual. She was exceptionally talented and capable in ways that went far beyond ordinary people. Suddenly, the man heard a strange noise and murmured in surprise, wondering what the sound could be. The scene then shifted to an earlier moment with Azadin. He was standing in a crowded street and thought about the Khorasar Peddlers Association. He remembered that it had started as a small group of merchants but had grown into a powerful organization within Khorasar. However, he also realized that the association was secretly one of the ghost organizations controlled by the Herald clan, meaning that all the merchants were secretly Aragasan. Azadin considered that it would be wise for them to stay unnoticed and lay low for the day to avoid drawing attention. As they moved through the street, a man noticed them and smirked. He asked who they were and remarked that one of them appeared to be the renowned 108th spirit, Sir Azadin. His companion asked if pretending to be a herald for the past 3 months had helped him, teasing Azadin by noting that he already had children serving him despite only 3 months of experience. Azadin calmly corrected him, saying that the children were not his servants. He told the companion to help him with a practical task, changing the horseshoes on the goats. He reminded the man that he could handle such simple work. The companion nodded and agreed, saying that if Azadin asked, it was their duty to help. Azadin then instructed him to exchange items for money as well, and asked whether Blue River arrowheads were available in stock. The companion leaned closer and mocked Azadin, recalling that he had become a herald through Elder Cassis's recommendation rather than through formal procedures. He even reminded him of a time when Azadin had struggled and fallen behind in basic training, calling him a bedwetter. Ishmael, noticing the tension, whispered to Midiam that he had suspected something might go wrong, and this situation confirmed his worry. Midiam, angry at the teasing, reminded Ishmael that regardless of Azadin's birth or past struggles, he was still a herald, and helping him properly was their duty. The companion then handed Azadin a change of clothes, and Azadin asked them to stop the childish pranks, explaining that he did not want to punish them physically. The companion, irritated, replied sarcastically, questioning whether they were acting like servants just because Azadin was supposedly so great. Midiam stepped forward and challenged, suggesting that if he was so frustrated, he should resolve the issue with a duel, and asked if he was scared of the risks involved. The man dismissed her, saying that she did not understand anything and that Azadin could not even take a single punch. Without hesitation, Midiam jumped high with great force, landed on the man's shoulder, and placed a dagger on his neck. The man panicked and asked what she was doing. Midiam scolded him, questioning whether he understood the seriousness of the situation. She declared that she was of Ether descent and that no mere servant had the right to speak sarcastically in front of a herald like Azadin. She challenged him directly, telling him that if he did not like Azadin, he should prove himself with his actions instead of making insulting remarks. Her confidence and bravery demonstrated her strong personality and skill as a fighter. At that moment, a man with blonde hair stepped in to calm the situation. He noted that things had gotten too heated and greeted Azadin, saying it had been a long time since they had met. Then, turning to Midiam, he asked her name. She introduced herself as Midiam of Ether. The man replied that he was Derek of Savan and apologized on behalf of his comrade. He requested that she stop, saying that he did not want any of his fellow clansmen to spill blood unnecessarily. Midiam landed nearby while Derek addressed the group. He instructed Peto and Kosarak to devote themselves to the duties of the Khorasar Peddlers Association. He then told Azadin to go wash up and join them, suggesting that they at least have dinner together as a group. The companions nodded in agreement. After taking a shower, Azadin felt refreshed and thought about how good it was to soak in a bath after such a long time. Ishmael noticed that Azadin had just stood quietly earlier and asked why he had not acted differently. He reminded Azadin that, even considering the circumstances of his birth, Arrel, who shared the same blood, was highly respected. Ishmael mentioned that anyone who challenged Arrel or spoke against her would immediately face serious consequences. Azadin calmly replied that Arrel had her own way of doing things. Ishmael commented that Azadin was truly an odd person, and Azadin, while putting on clothes and walking toward the exit, told him that was why he should hurry and convince Midiam so that Ishmael could continue on his own journey, warning that otherwise he might become odd like Azadin himself. Later during dinner, Derek asked Azadin if he had heard anything about Arrel. Azadin denied it, and Derek expressed surprise, asking if Azadin was not even concerned about his older sister. Azadin explained that considering her abilities, she was not someone worth worrying about. He also expressed disbelief that Derek had come all the way there and even started attacking the association members. Suddenly, Derek smacked a basket on Azadin's head and shouted, demanding that he start reporting his results immediately. Azadin calmly replied that he was doing his work properly and was even collecting gold coins while carrying out his tasks. Derek, frustrated, interrupted him and emphasized that he was talking about serious business, not small tasks. He asked what had happened to the plan of attacking other merchant associations and keeping them under control. Instead of answering directly, Azadin showed Derek a magical stick he had obtained. He told Derek to look at it, asking if he had ever seen anything like it before. Derek examined the stick and confirmed that he had. He explained that the Kurt Godkin bishops used such tools to search for copies of the Book of the Divine King. He also mentioned that the daughter of Ether had delivered the district leader's letter, which was why she had been called to act in the first place. Azadin remarked that it seemed everyone already knew about this, suggesting that the information was widely circulated. Derek then pointed out that Azadin had not been making reports to the district leader, meaning he was the only one unaware of the common knowledge. Nevertheless, he acknowledged that bringing in the magical wand was still a good contribution, although it would have been even better if Azadin had brought the actual copy of the Book of the Divine King. Azadin, holding an apple and teasing in tones, suggested that all the other heralds had returned empty-handed, hinting at his own success compared to theirs. This made Derek shout at him in frustration, demanding that Azadin hand over the copy immediately. Derek, clenching his teeth in frustration, accused Azadin of not trusting them. He insisted that they could protect the book much better than someone as powerless as Azadin. Azadin calmly responded, warning Derek that the situation was more dangerous than he realized. He explained that one of the foolish sons of Margrave Kazal, along with a group of mercenaries, was approaching. Among them were heretics who followed Kurt, making the threat more serious. Azadin's reasoning showed his strategic mind, as he considered not only physical strength but also the reputation and the political consequences of a battle. Derek, still confident, insisted that they would not lose against the approaching group. He acknowledged that he had been defeated by Errol in the past but reminded Azadin that he was a former herald and had the experience to protect the book. Azadin pointed out the problem with this logic, noting that if a group of merchants fought too effectively, rumors would spread. Derek, however, dismissed this concern, insisting that protecting the book was more important than worrying about rumors. He also emphasized that Azadin was much weaker than Errol, highlighting the difference in strength between them. Azadin reflected on his past and the difference between his childhood and the present. He remembered that when they were all kids, he had been no match for Errol. Compared to that time, he had grown much stronger, but he knew that Errol had become the strongest warrior of their kind, with countless followers at her command. It had been years since he last saw her, and he could not even imagine how much stronger she would be now. Despite these thoughts, Azadin decided that it would be best for him to hand over the copy of the Book of the Divine King to the regional manager himself. He believed this would be the safest and most responsible way to handle the situation. Suddenly, a man arrived and shouted that they had a problem, creating immediate tension and signaling that danger or complications were approaching. The scene then shifted to an earlier moment at the eastern gates of a post town, where Tarkiev had arrived with his force. He gave a sack of money to a soldier named Gerand as a token of gratitude for passing through the gates successfully. Tarkiev praised Gerand for his hard work, showing that he could be generous and respectful toward those under his command. Gerand, however, expressed that he felt put in a difficult position, reminding Tarkiev that he too was a knight and had responsibilities. Tarkiev reassured him that if something went wrong, they would both face consequences together, possibly even being forced to serve as priests in the king's church. Suddenly, the situation turned chaotic when a man attacked Gerand. Tarkiev shouted that he did not want Gerand dead and warned him that the attacker was making things unnecessarily difficult. He reminded everyone that there were 3 gates to control, emphasizing the challenge of managing multiple threats at once. A man showed his power by throwing a spider from his palm onto the soldiers. The soldiers screamed in pain as the spider injected its venom, and the man declared seriously that he was full of power. Tarkiev immediately recognized him as a Kurt heretic. The man smirked and teased Tarkiev, saying that it had taken him too long to notice. He suggested they work together for mutual benefit. He would obtain the Book of the Divine King and Tarkiev could get his revenge. Then, mocking Tarkiev further, he revealed that Tarkiev had no choice in the matter because no one would be allowed to leave the village anymore. He ordered the soldiers to chase after the thief, and the soldiers ran toward the village to follow these commands. Inside the village, Ishmael noticed the situation and asked what was going on. One man explained that the soldiers were not letting anyone leave the village. Ishmael angrily demanded to know why they could not leave. A soldier bluntly replied that it was because they said so. Ishmael, clenching his teeth, told the soldier that he had no right to stop them and insisted on moving out, calling the soldiers nothing but mercenaries. The soldier tried to stop him by grabbing his face, insisting again that no one was allowed to leave. However, something strange happened. The soldier suddenly began acting hungry. His mouth expanded unnaturally, and spiders started emerging from it. In the middle of this chaos, an arrow struck the soldier's face, stopping him immediately. Azadin quickly acted, stabbing his sword into the soldier's head. He explained while looking at the spiders that they were subordinates of the Spider Queen Arthra, revealing the true nature and danger of their enemies. Midiam shouted at Azadin, asking if he had defeated the enemy. Azadin, standing on top of a fallen man, calmly replied that this was only the beginning of the fight. He instructed Midiam to go inside the tent to get some food and water. Ishmael asked if they should do it right now, and Azadin replied firmly that they should, explaining that many people were starving to death and they could not delay. Suddenly, a dangerous man with a wide mouth appeared behind Azadin and slashed at him with a weapon. Azadin quickly dodged and observed that the man was still able to move despite his strange condition. He realized that spiders must be controlling the man's nervous system. Thinking strategically, Azadin wondered what would happen if he sent shocks through the man's body and decided to test it. He attacked the man, releasing a blast of energy. The man's legs began to transform into spider-like legs. In response, the man slashed at a burning piece of wood, causing them to step back. Midiam and Ishmael quickly created a circle of fire around them to contain the enemy. Azadin praised their work and reminded them to make sure the fire did not reach the merchant tents, showing his careful thinking even in the middle of battle. Azadin then told the enemy to stay still and stay nice and toasty as the flames engulfed him. Once the man was dead, Azadin turned back to the urgent matter at hand and asked what about the food and water. Midiam announced that they had collected everything they could find and expressed excitement about how useful they had been. She suggested that Azadin should take them along more permanently, emphasizing that he would continue needing their help. Suddenly, Owl appeared and perched on Azadin's shoulder. Azadin noticed this and asked if there was a new contractor, and Owl nodded in confirmation. Azadin asked where the new threat was located, and Owl replied that it was to the west and that the enemies had just stopped breathing. Azadin immediately gave orders to Midiam and Ishmael to prepare a fire and informed them that they were heading to the western gates. He then jumped into the air to move quickly toward the location. Midiam commented to Ishmael that Azadin was simply ordering them around without hesitation. The scene then shifted to another battlefield where Azadin attacked a spider-like man. He thought to himself that the creature just would not die. He realized that a normal human would have been knocked out long ago, but these enemies kept mutating and their numbers were rapidly increasing. Azadin also worried that he might not be able to reach the contractor in time due to the growing horde. Suddenly, Midiam used her magic technique, Blue Lightning, and shot an arrow at one of the enemies. She exclaimed excitedly that she knew the lightning would be effective because of the enemy's weakness to fire. Azadin praised her skill, acknowledging that she truly had ether abilities. However, he also advised her that nature's power, like a grimoire, was beautiful but should not be used too often. He told her to rest. Ishmael, frustrated, observed that Midiam was pushing herself so hard just to gain Azadin's approval. He asked Azadin if the contractor they were pursuing was already dead. Azadin confirmed that he was, but Ishmael still questioned why they were doing all this fighting. Azadin explained that a contract was a contract, even if the target was dead, and that he could not leave without checking the area personally. Ishmael pointed out that there was a limit to how many of these creatures they could burn. Azadin agreed and clarified that his plan was to kill the leader of the enemies instead. The scene shifted to the western gates where many dead bodies lay on the ground and blood was scattered everywhere. Tarkiev looked at the Kurt heretic with concern and asked if he was sure everything was all right, reminding him that they were supposed to search for the Divine King's scripture. The Kurt heretic replied that although the situation was a little different from what he had expected, things were going more or less well. Tarkiev, frustrated by the response, shouted that the thief would escape at this rate. Then Tarkiev noticed a symbol drawn on the soil and realized that it was a symbol used to call the demon of the golden coin. The Kurt heretic clarified that this referred to the Herald clan, and he guessed that the thief who had stolen his belongings might actually be one of the heralds searching for the Divine King's scripture. Tarkiev asked if he intended to fight them, and the Kurt heretic said that it would be for the best. He explained that since the request for the book had already reached them, one of the heralds would probably come on their own. Suddenly, an arrow was shot at the Kurt heretic from an unknown source, but he caught it with his hand. Before he could react further, another arrow pierced his head. He commented, asking if the first arrow had been intentionally weakened and then transformed into a spider-like creature. At that moment, Azadin attacked him and remarked that he found the heretic pretty intriguing himself. Azadin attacked Kurt, slashing his sword, but Kurt quickly dodged the attack. Tarkiev, observing the fight, thought that Kurt's instinctive dodge had been a clever move. At the same time, he felt a sense of dread, realizing that no matter who won, his situation was dangerous. He thought about his mother and felt a pang of longing. As he watched Azadin tear apart the spider-like legs of Kurt, Tarkiev realized that this enemy must be extremely powerful, because even in his transformed spider-like state, Kurt, raising more spider legs from his back, declared that Azadin could not kill him with strength alone. Azadin, however, remained confident and pointed out that Kurt was still only a spider, and spiders could not reach or scratch their own backs. With one decisive slash, Azadin tore Kurt's head from his body. He then turned his attention to Tarkiev. Tarkiev, terrified, held up a coin and shouted that it was the Emperor's golden coin. Azadin asked where he had gotten it. Tarkiev thought about what his mother had told him, that the Herald clan could be manipulated using the Emperor's golden coins. Realizing the danger, he quickly placed the coin on a symbol and pleaded for help, saying that he had been infected by the spider creatures and needed to be saved. Azadin accepted a new request and commented that the contractor they had received was useless, calling him a piece of garbage. Ishmael and Midiam soon arrived and listened to the full story. Midiam, filled with rage, shouted that this person had actually submitted the request. Azadin nodded but told her not to worry about that and asked if she could use her blue lightning magic again, requesting that this time she make it weaker. Midiam agreed to help but reminded Azadin that she was not even his subordinate. She agreed to assist, but only after pointing out that he would have to include her in his contracts as well. Azadin sighed in defeat and said that he would take her on as his subordinate, which made her happy. Ishmael, observing her, thought to himself that he had never seen Midiam so desperate for someone else's attention. No matter what he had done in the past, she had never reacted so strongly, but Azadin seemed to catch her attention easily, which Ishmael considered unfair. Then Midiam turned to Tarkiev and asked if she should begin, making sure that the magic would be weak enough so the target was only barely alive. She then used her blue lightning magic to strike. When Midiam killed Tarkiev's spider, which was a big threat. After that, Azadin explained that the Emperor's voice had accepted the loved child's request, which meant the person was now considered worthy of protection. He added that once someone became a contractor, they had to be treated sincerely, even after their request was fulfilled, because the Emperor's voice gained life energy from the contractors. Ishmael asked if they could leave now, but Azadin thought to himself that he wanted to eliminate the remaining spider mercenaries in the village. However, he did not say this aloud because he knew Ishmael, the puppy-eyed kid, would complain endlessly. So, Azadin agreed and told them they could leave. At that moment, Tarkiev begged to go with them. He said that once the king's church began their investigation, he would be in serious danger and asked them to help him reach a place without holy knights. He reminded them that they had promised to treat him sincerely even after his request was fulfilled. Later, the scene shifted to Tarkiev shouting at some people, asking for a place to stay. A man asked why he had come there, but Midiam and Ishmael quickly covered Tarkiev's face to stop him from talking too much. Azadin then smiled and gave a coin to the man, saying that they were traveling and looking for a place to rest for the night, and asked politely if they could use his barn. The man nodded in agreement, allowing them to stay. Later, when the group settled in a room, Tarkiev spoke with a disgusted tone and said that there was a reason the poor were poor. Azadin, while closing the door, replied that there was a reason, and there was also a reason that a noble like Tarkiev was with them. He told Tarkiev, whom he called the love child, to think before speaking. Azadin then suggested they tie up the goats on the first floor and sleep on the second floor. Tarkiev complained, worrying about fleas or other problems, but Azadin pointed out that having spiders inside your stomach would be far worse. Tarkiev still said that he could not sleep in a place like that. Later, Midiam whispered to Azadin, asking about the king's church because the villagers had seemed both scared and happy when the holy knights were present. Azadin explained that the king's church consisted of knights who upheld the laws of the 8 kings. They learned white magic and were supposed to protect people, so most villagers welcomed their presence. However, in reality, Azadin said, the church was mostly filled with foolish nobles who stole more than they protected. After this conversation, the group finally went to sleep. The next morning, the scene shifted to the woods near where Azadin and his group had been resting. Gardreg and his soldiers were walking through the area, growing impatient. One soldier asked Gardreg how long they were going to keep walking like this, and Gardreg told him to pipe down, saying that he also wanted to finish the task quickly. The soldier complained, saying that they were supposed to be killing monsters, but it looked like the monsters had run away. He suggested that they could just claim victory and go back to get a drink. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from the bushes. Gardreg pushed the bushes aside and saw a monster. He realized it was a wyvern and thought it looked like a young one, which meant there must be fully grown wyverns nearby. The soldiers immediately shot arrows at the young wyvern, but it flew into the air, escaping their attack. One soldier pointed out that the area they were in must have once been a farm. Then Gardreg and his soldiers saw an injured man and a woman. Gardreg decided that they had to be killed, believing they were the ones who had summoned the wyvern. He ordered his soldiers to attack, calling them heathens and thinking that killing them was the only way to avoid punishment. The soldiers raised their swords, ready to strike the man and the woman. Later, the scene shifted to a room where Owl woke Azadin up, telling him to get up. Azadin, still sleepy, said that it had not even been 2 hours since he had fallen asleep. A young child ran into the hall crying for help. Azadin quickly held the child and asked what was happening. The child explained that his father had been killed by knights. The scene then shifted to the ground outside, which was filled with dead bodies, revealing the destruction caused by Gardreg and his soldiers. Gardreg asked if anyone had found the child, but a soldier replied that they could not even see a trace of where the child might be hiding. Gardreg thought to himself that the villagers should have died with their parents because hiding was only making the situation more troublesome. He reflected on the fact that killing innocent villagers could lead to execution, but he believed it was necessary. He considered that there was a way to repent and be forgiven, but thinking about Bishop Salasma's harsh temperament, he was unsure if forgiveness would even be granted. Gardreg also knew that almost no penitents succeeded in their trials. Most either became bandits or died on the road. At his age, he felt he could not become a penitential knight, and he worried that failure would ruin the future of his daughter Maya, who had already suffered as an outcast because of her useless father. Gardreg decided that he had to do whatever was necessary as a father to protect her future. After thinking this, he shouted orders to his soldiers, telling them that there must be more people hiding and that they should find and kill them. He justified the violence by saying it was just a tiny village that no one even knew existed. The soldiers spotted a woman running away and shouted to each other, trying to stop her. One soldier aimed an arrow at her, demanding to know where she thought she was going. But the arrow missed because his hand had slipped in the blood. Frustrated, he called the woman an old hag and prepared to attack again. Suddenly, a stone struck the soldier's face, surprising him. Gardreg shouted angrily, demanding to know who was attacking them. Meanwhile, Azadin admitted to himself that he was very tired and lacked strength, but when a soldier attacked him, he dodged and realized he had no weapon to fight properly. He decided to take the risk and used a magic technique, throwing stones at the soldier while chanting the spell, hitting the soldier's head shield. Azadin then kicked the soldier hard. Gardreg confronted Azadin, asking if he even knew who they were, claiming that they were holy knights of the king's church. Azadin challenged them, saying that these so-called holy knights were the ones slaughtering innocent people in Hybris. Gardreg accused the villagers of being heretics and Azadin demanded proof, questioning how a simple couple farming at dawn could be considered heretics. Gardreg replied that no one knew heretics better than the holy knights and accused Azadin of being a heretic too because he was defending the villagers. Gardreg unsheathed his sword, which shone very brightly, intending to blind Azadin before attacking. Azadin recognized the trick from a previous enemy who had used a blinding light before striking and thought that it was too bright to see clearly. Just as Gardreg attacked, an arrow suddenly struck him, fired by Ishmael and Midiam, interrupting his attack and giving Azadin a chance to act. After the attack on Gardreg's soldiers, Midiam asked Azadin if his eyes were okay. Ishmael thought to himself that he did not even have eyes, so the question did not make sense for him, but then explained that on their way 2 holy knights had suddenly charged at him and he had taken care of them. Midiam said that she had not killed the knights herself and asked if she had done well. Azadin nodded, reassuring her. Gardreg, watching them, was shocked that a child could use such a strong bow and had even defeated 2 trainee knights. He realized that Azadin and his companions were from the Herald clan, which meant they were loyal to the emperor. Gardreg angrily called them soulless blasphemers and claimed that the farmers they had attacked were heretics after all. Azadin challenged him, pointing out that Gardreg had committed indiscriminate slaughter without real proof. He said that just by looking at Gardreg's short spear it was clear it was not meant for combat against people and that they had come to hunt. Azadin explained that the villagers were probably mistaken for animals while gathering herbs or mushrooms, and the massacre had been done only to silence witnesses. He told Gardreg to pay compensation to the village and swear to become a penitential knight, promising that he would not kill him if he obeyed. Gardreg refused and shouted that capturing Azadin would solve everything. Then, he used his mana to create a large glowing hammer, preparing to attack with great power. The chapter ended with the tension rising as Gardreg prepared to strike. Azadin tried to throw a spear to break Gardreg's large hammer, but the spear shattered into pieces instead. Gardreg then slammed his hammer into the ground, forcing everyone to start running to avoid the attack. Azadin took arrows from Midiam and said that he would borrow them. He began shooting arrows at Gardreg, but Gardreg laughed and mocked him, saying that he could not even land a proper hit. As Gardreg charged at him, Azadin vanished from sight, then shot an arrow that passed near Gardreg's head and returned to Azadin's hand. He explained to Midiam that it was a technique called arrow return. Later, a young child crying while sitting near his parents' dead bodies. Azadin turned to the Tide soldiers and told them to compensate the families of those they had harmed on the farm. He said that if they became penitential knights, he would not kill them. An old man shouted angrily, saying that the soldiers had killed his son and slaughtered him like livestock. A woman also shouted, crying that calling them heretics was nonsense because they had devoted themselves to the king's church all their lives, and even during droughts when they were starving they had never resented the church. One soldier angrily shouted at her to shut up, claiming that lowly people like them could not speak against a holy knight and that they would all be cursed. The woman, however, placed a weapon on the soldier's neck and said that their survival itself was a curse, then killed him. Azadin thought that if they killed the knights they would no longer be protected by the king's law and would have to abandon the farm and live as wanderers, which would be a harsh life. Later, he reassured Ishmael and Midiam that at least they did not have to worry about the dead knights turning into undead. Ishmael asked him if, had the knights agreed to become penitential knights, he would really have forgiven them. The law of Hybris, how unfair and cruel it was toward the Herald clan. According to a ruling from the royal court, a promise made to the heralds was considered the same as making a promise to a roadside stone. Just as breaking a promise to a stone was meaningless, breaking a promise to the heralds was excused. Since the heralds were treated as soulless beings, any oath given to them had no real weight in the eyes of the law. Because of this twisted principle, no matter how dishonorable the act might be, if the victim belonged to the herald clan, it was forgiven by the law of Hybris. Even when the holy knights swore to Azadin that they would become penitent knights, there was no certainty that such a promise would ever be kept. Azadin reflected on this injustice and said that no matter how cruel it sounded, this was the law of Hybris. The people of Hybris simply followed their own principles, and according to them, the heralds were not worthy of respect or trust. Ishmael, however, struggled with this idea. He asked what would happen if the holy knights made an oath and broke it. He wondered how the grieving families of the victims could ever find peace when their enemies were allowed to escape responsibility so easily. Azadin answered with a colder but practical view. He explained that survival was far more important than revenge. He reminded Ishmael that there were children among the heralds as well. Even if those families had managed to settle their grudges in battle, their children now had to live as nomads, wandering from place to place. That kind of life would be harsh and painful. Azadin admitted that he hated the thought of sparing enemies who had already been defeated, because to him it felt dishonorable. However, he also said that killing someone out of necessity during battle, when strength and survival demanded it, was a different matter. As Ishmael listened to him, he could not help but notice how firm and confident Azadin's words sounded. Even when speaking about the holy knights of the king's church, who were known as powerful and dangerous enemies, Azadin showed absolute confidence in himself. Ishmael realized that Azadin did not speak like a man who doubted or feared his path. Instead, he spoke like someone who had already accepted the cruel reality of the world and was determined to survive, no matter what. Later in the night, Azadin and his group continued their journey. The road was dark and heavy with silence, and fatigue showed in Azadin's voice as he complained that they would have to march again at dawn and wondered when he would ever get a chance to rest. In the middle of this exhausting atmosphere, a child suddenly broke down crying and shouted that everything was Azadin's fault. The child screamed that if the heralds had not come to their farm, his parents would still be alive. Azadin, instead of showing anger, calmly asked where they were going. A man stepped forward and explained that they were heading southwest. He said they hoped to find shelter at a relative's house and would decide about the children's future later. Since the drought was worsening, there was no reason to remain on their ruined farm. Hearing this, Azadin accepted the decision and told them that this was where they would part ways, since his group needed to continue their own journey. The man nodded respectfully and wished Azadin well, offering him the blessing of the emperor. At that moment, an owl descended quietly from the night sky and perched on Azzadine's shoulder. The owl, who carried the spirit of the past, spoke in a bitter tone. He complained that the people treated him like a plague, even though he had worked tirelessly to bring them civilization and wisdom. Azzadine responded without sympathy, telling the owl that he had no one to blame but himself. He pointed out that the owl had failed to prepare a proper plan of succession and that this failure had brought about the present suffering. The owl, after a moment of silence, admitted that this was true. Still, he said with pride that even achieving one generation of peace was valuable, especially since a single generation of the Yagas god clan lasted for a long time. Azzadine listened and nodded, and with that, they continued moving toward their destination. As the group traveled on, Tarkiev broke the silence and turned to Azzadine. With admiration, he told him that what he had accomplished earlier was truly incredible. He said it was unbelievable that Azzadine had taken down multiple holy knights of the king's church at once, a feat that few could even imagine. Miriam looked at Azzadine with her usual playful smile. In a teasing tone, she asked if he had even seen the battle properly since he had been hiding so tightly during it. Her words carried mischief, as if she wanted to provoke him. Azzadine, however, grew frustrated and snapped back, telling her not to speak nonsense. He warned her not to go around telling people that he had killed holy knights because such rumors would only bring them more trouble than glory. Tarkiev, listening to this exchange, silently agreed in his own thoughts. He realized that spreading such news would indeed be a hassle, but at the same time he knew there were still matters they could not ignore. They needed to investigate the strange gold coins that Man had shown them earlier and also look into the mercenary group that seemed suspicious. Tarkiev sighed inwardly, thinking that it looked like he would have to carry this burden for a long time. Later on, the group stopped at a small tea stall along the road to take a short rest. The simple warmth of tea gave them a brief comfort after the exhaustion of travel. While serving them, the tea stall owner curiously asked Azzadine where the so-called 3-month rookie herald was heading next. Azzadine answered plainly that he was heading towards Salasma and asked if something was happening there. The tea stall owner explained that indeed there was a situation, though he said it was fine if Azzadine refused. The job was to hunt wyverns and bandits, which was a dangerous task for anyone to accept. Azzadine, however, did not hesitate. Instead of directly agreeing, he made a condition in his usual calm but confident way. He asked the stall owner to give him some snacks, specifically something made from sugar and mugwort. With a faint smirk, he added that if he was given that treat, he would take the job. The tea stall owner handed Azzadine the snacks he had asked for and then leaned closer, saying that it was time to explain the mission in more detail. He told Azzadine that up ahead the rescue order was busy carrying out relief efforts, but the problem was that they were practically forcing merchants to make donations. Azzadine listened calmly and remarked that it was understandable to some degree. After all, the knights were taking offerings from the rich and then using those resources to help refugees, so it was not entirely unreasonable. The stall owner continued explaining. He said that because of the knights' behavior, many travelers and merchants preferred to take side paths to avoid them. Unfortunately, those routes were dangerous since wyverns and bandits often appeared there. On top of that, the rescue order seemed to be secretly investigating the Sacred King's tomb at the same time. The man looked doubtful and asked Azzadine if he truly planned to accept this job, reminding him that the guild leader had said Azzadine usually did not get involved in merchant affairs. Azzadine gave his answer without hesitation. He said that he should at least do this much because it was not an assassination or a personal vendetta, but instead an act of helping people. The man let out a laugh at his unusual reasoning and remarked that Azzadine was quite unique, just as the rumors claimed. However, before the mood could settle, Miriam suddenly struck the tea stall owner with her fist and then placed her dagger against his neck. Her eyes blazed with anger as she scolded him. She demanded to know how a mere servant dared to act so casually and disrespectfully toward a herald. She accused him of always picking fights and warned him to show proper respect. Azzadine quickly stepped in and stopped her. He reminded her firmly that their clan valued hierarchy and seniority, and told her that if she had no intention of killing the man, then she should put her sword away. Hearing his words, Miriam stepped back reluctantly, lowering her dagger. Azzadine then turned to the stall owner and apologized for her behavior. With the tense moment settled, they soon left the stall and continued their journey on the road. As they walked, Azzadine spoke to Miriam. He thanked her first, acknowledging her intention to protect his honor, but then he gave her a warning. He told her not to cause trouble with anyone who was closely connected to Sabanga. He explained that his own predecessor had been rumored to have been purged for offending Sabanga, and he did not want her to fall into the same kind of danger. Miriam, however, laughed lightly at his serious warning. With a playful smile, she asked if he was worried about her and then assured him that she understood. Later, Azzedine turned his attention to Tarkiev and shared his thoughts about Count Kazal. He explained that since Count Kazal was still young, it was unlikely that he would create a rigid plan for succession anytime soon. Instead, Azzedine pointed out a strategy. Even Tarkiev's own mother came from a wealthy and powerful family, and from Kazal's perspective, dangling the head position as bait would encourage in-laws from different families to compete and bring forth their wealth. That kind of situation worked to Kazal's advantage, allowing him to remain in power comfortably while drawing resources from others. Azzedine concluded that Kazal would continue to drag things out and milk the situation for as long as possible. Tarkiev, however, did not seem satisfied. He argued that even if Kazal played such games, it did not mean he could just sit back and do nothing. Azzedine disagreed and told him that for now the best choice was to do exactly that. The conversation carried a heavy tone, but before it could deepen further, Ishmael suddenly interrupted. He pointed ahead and told Azzedine that he believed they had reached the inn the merchant had mentioned earlier. As they approached the inn, a lighter moment followed. Azzedine was seen gently petting and loving a mountain goat standing in front of the building. Ishmael looked at him with surprise and asked if he had left the goat there earlier. Azzedine explained that the place where he had first met the group had been too dry for the mountain goat to survive, so he had asked the merchant guild to bring the animal here and take care of it. With that matter settled, he told the others to head inside the inn. As they entered, Azzedine noticed a young boy and girl sitting together and asked who they were. Tarkiev explained that they were his half-siblings. The boy introduced himself politely as Kaka, while the girl introduced herself as Chico. Azzedine greeted them with courtesy, saying that he and his companions were pilgrims and were grateful that Sir Tarkiev was escorting them on their journey. Kaka looked at his brother curiously and asked if he was truly escorting pilgrims. Chico followed with another question, asking what had happened to the mercenaries that usually traveled with Tarkiev. Tarkiev answered in a firm voice that the mercenaries had betrayed him, leaving the matter at that. Later, while they all shared a meal together, Chico asked Tarkiev where he planned to go next. Tarkiev explained that he intended to return to Salasma, and since the pilgrims were also traveling there, they would continue the journey together. At this, Chico gave a cautious warning. She told them that the rescue order had set up camp ahead, hinting that their path might not be easy. Kaka, on the other hand, seemed distracted by Miriam. He commented that she was beautiful and suggested that a girl like her might attract unwanted attention. He warned that the rescue order might even try to take her away, so it would be wiser to avoid them altogether. Hearing this, Azzedine picked up an apple and calmly questioned the idea. He asked if the followers of the three archangels would really take someone against their will. He reasoned that such holy knights who claimed to live by sacred law should not force someone who refused. As the new group prepared for their journey, a man approached Azzedine and asked if he was the pilgrim who would be traveling with them. Kaka quickly explained that these men were their employers, merchants who had chosen to take the forest path in order to avoid the rescue order. One of the merchants then spoke with a mocking tone, saying that Azzedine's group was avoiding monsters and moving easily only because of the protection provided by the merchants. He added that some people even paid mercenaries for such protection, suggesting that Azzedine's group was benefiting unfairly. Azzedine kept his thoughts to himself, but his mind was sharp. He reasoned that traveling with more people actually helped reduce monster attacks in the forest, since most monsters preferred to hunt alone. In the end, both groups were helping each other by moving together, but instead of showing understanding, the merchant chose to mock them. Azzedine also thought it had been a wise decision to send the children ahead, away from such company. As the evening settled in, one of the men offered Azzedine alcohol, but he refused politely. The man then noticed the bandages covering Azzedine's eyes and pressed him to take them off once, as if trying to provoke him. Before Azzedine could respond, Tarkiev spoke firmly with a serious expression. He told the merchant to leave Azzedine alone, explaining that he carried a lot of history with him and did not appreciate being pushed. Tarkiev urged the man to drink and stop bothering his companion. The man, however, continued teasing. With a sly grin, he asked Azzedine if the young companions traveling with him were his children, remarking that the girl was very pretty. Azzedine replied calmly that she was not his daughter but a younger relative. The merchant then made an even bolder suggestion. He offered to take the girl as an adopted daughter, promising that they would raise her well if Azzedine entrusted her to them. The proposal carried arrogance, as if she were a piece of property to be traded. He immediately declined the offer. The merchants began to gossip among themselves. One of the men suddenly claimed that at the lumber mill they were heading toward, there was a woman from the Herald clan. Another man corrected him. saying that to be precise, the woman's father had been a wandering herald. Since he could not take his child back to the Herald Lands, the girl had been left behind. Eventually, the owner of the lumber mill had bought her and raised her as a slave. He added in a casual, cruel tone that her face was beautiful. A third man joined the talk and asked why they should not also take the children she had given birth to, since she seemed to have had many. Hearing this, Azzedine could no longer remain seated. He stood up, his voice breaking with grief, and tears filled his eyes. Overcome with emotion, he shouted that this was disgraceful, that the people of the Divine King had fallen into deep corruption. His outburst silenced the air for a moment, but one of the men tried to place a hand on his shoulder and spoke in a calm voice, saying he simply wanted to make some money by buying a slave. At that instant, Azzedine's fury exploded. He struck the man with his fist and shouted that this was exactly the problem. His voice thundered as he raised his hand in prayer, calling upon the three great holy archangels. He reminded everyone that the archangels had sworn to grant the power of white magic to those who upheld the three sacred virtues and had sealed themselves within the inland peninsula to protect humanity. But as people abandoned those virtues, the rescue order had begun to lose its divine strength. Azzedine's voice grew sharper as he condemned them for indulging in corruption so willingly. He warned them that the era of Jupiter was approaching and urged them to embrace the three sacred virtues once again. He commanded them to avoid pleasure, corruption, and prostitution. One of the merchants tried to calm the situation. He laughed it off and told the others that Azzedine must have been drunk. He advised everyone to head to their rooms for the night, brushing aside what had just happened. The group slowly dispersed, each person moving to their quarters, and the noise of conversation faded into silence. Inside their room, Tarkiev looked at Azzedine with suspicion and asked if he had only been pretending to be drunk. Azzedine smiled slightly and admitted that he had. He explained that it was a trick, pointing out that everyone naturally hated fanatics, so by acting like one he was able to turn their scorn away from his real intentions. Before Tarkiev could respond, Miriam suddenly spoke up with a burst of laughter. With excitement in her tone, she said that Azzedine looked more like a drunkard than a fanatic. Her playful teasing lightened the heavy mood in the room. Azzedine turned to her in surprise and asked if she was still awake, realizing that she must have heard everything that had been said earlier. Ishmael, who had also been listening closely, raised a more serious question. He asked if Azzedine's strong reaction had been because of the woman from the Herald clan that the merchants had mentioned. Azzedine admitted that he had never received a proper report from the previous 108th commander, and because of that, he needed to confirm whether the woman truly belonged to the clan or not. Miriam then asked what he would do if he confirmed that the rumors were true. Her question carried an edge, wondering whether he would choose mercy or violence. Azzedine's answer was steady but cold. He said it would depend on the situation. The group of men, carrying shields and swords, decided to move through the forest path. One of the men shouted that if anyone saw any monsters, they should shout immediately to warn the others. Azzedine noticed that there were more soldiers than he had expected, which made him think that they might be ready for a fight, but also harder to move quickly. Miriam walked beside him and said that something smelled bad. Azzedine realized that Miriam had noticed danger and thought that he had a good instinct. Azzedine sensed the presence of black magic and a trace of corruption, meaning that some dark force was nearby. He understood that the other men had not noticed this danger. Worrying for their safety, Azzedine warned Miriam to stay close to the mountain goat because he knew something dangerous was coming. Suddenly, many wolves attacked them. One of the men shouted that the wolves were undead and ordered everyone to form a barrier to protect themselves. The men quickly raised their shields, stopping the wolves, while the wolves watched them carefully, as if they remembered how to hunt humans from their lives before becoming undead. Azzedine realized that these wolves still had memories from when they were alive and were planning to attack at the most vulnerable moment. A wolf attacked from behind, but Tarkiev struck it with his shield and told the others to get out of the way. Miriam smiled and said that even though Tarkiev had put on full plate armor by himself, he had still done his part in protecting everyone. Suddenly, a man appeared behind the wolves, and one of the merchants thought it was Karim and asked if it really was him. But to their horror, the man quickly revealed that he and the others were actually zombies. One of the soldiers shouted for everyone to grab their bows and fire arrows, hoping to stop the undead, but the arrows had no effect at all. Seeing this, Azzedine quickly picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at one of the wolves, which caused a small explosion. He told the men that he would take care of the hunting dogs while they focused on fighting the zombies. The soldiers bravely attacked the zombies with their swords and axes, slashing through them as best as they could. Azadin watched carefully and felt relieved that the mercenaries were fighting well, but he also realized something worrying. Their movements were too coordinated to be natural. In the middle of the chaos, one soldier shouted angrily that this was not what they had agreed to. They had been hired to hunt wyverns, not fight zombies, and they wanted to go back. Azadin, crossing his arms, asked if going back was even possible. The men looked around in confusion and realized with fear that the forest path they had been following had disappeared, leaving them trapped. Azadin realized that the magic user had blocked their way back through the forest. He understood that their enemies were planning to kill everyone in the group. He also thought about the possibility that the sorcerer might have harmed one of their clan's women. Azadin felt anger at the idea but reminded himself that they did not yet know the truth, so they could not act recklessly or let anyone die without reason. He told Tarkiev to try to calm the soldiers down. Tarkiev nodded and shouted at the men, introducing himself as Tarki, son of Kazal the Margrave, and explaining that he came from the noble bloodline of the great divine king. He said that even men like them would have something to brag about for generations just by being with him. Despite this, the men ignored him and started walking away. Tarkiev was confused and asked why they were leaving, and Azadin angrily asked how they could act like that in such a dangerous situation. Chico, worried about the magic in the forest, explained that if the forest itself was distorting the path, trying to go back would be even more dangerous. She threw black powder on the ground and said that the magic was strong black magic, likely created by a caster who had already died, leaving only a lingering spirit behind. She added that, with undead creatures in the area, encountering such magic was not surprising. Azadin quietly thought that the siblings in their group were very useful after all, showing how skilled and helpful they were. Midiam, noticing the danger, suggested that the Herald clanwoman might already have died, expressing concern for what had happened. Azadin thought about the Herald clanwoman and said he could not be completely sure about her fate. He explained that if she belonged to that clan, she might have been born with a rare ability called Yellowbird amidst wind and moon, which could allow her to master black magic without dying. He added that if she was still alive, there might be signs of her in the village, and at least they could try to talk to her to learn the truth. Later, the group reached the village, which was unusually quiet. Kaka noticed the silence and commented on it as they went deeper into the village. As they moved forward, they heard a sound coming from behind a door. Kaka, confused, asked if it might be an undead creature. A voice replied from behind the door, saying that she was human and introducing herself as a holy knight of the king's church. When they opened the door, one knight fell outside and Midiam warned that it was dangerous to face such situations alone. The knight insisted that she had to handle it herself and told them not to come closer. After a short while, she arrived safely, smiling and apologizing for the late introduction. She thanked them for rescuing her and introduced herself as Maya, an official of the Salasma diocese. Azadin was surprised, wondering how someone so high-ranking had ended up in such a dangerous situation. Maya explained that she had come to the village on a holy mission, but while investigating a warehouse, monsters had suddenly attacked. The terrified villagers had panicked and locked her inside the warehouse, and since her weapon was left with her horse, she could not break the door. She noted that it was quiet now because the villagers had already discovered the undead in the area. The group realized that the village had been through a frightening ordeal and that Maya's presence was very important. She was a high-ranking official who could help them understand the situation, fight the undead, and possibly find clues about the Herald clan woman. Azadin told the group that the other merchants and mercenaries he had traveled with had fought off the monsters, keeping him and the others safe. Maya asked if he had seen any other holy knights nearby. She explained that she had been ordered by the bishop to subdue a wyvern in this area and that her father trained apprentice knights, so they were supposed to meet up near the village. Azadin asked if her father was a holy knight as well, and Maya nodded, saying that her father was a great holy knight and that their family had served the king's church for generations, protecting its laws. Azadin thought deeply about this. He realized that the lumber village and the farmland they had passed were connected by a road, and he considered that the knight he had killed earlier might have been her father. He reflected that generations of service were not always something to boast about because by the original rules, holy knights of the king's church were not even supposed to have children. Azadin then told Maya that if she was willing she could search for her horse while scouting with the other knights and mercenaries and that she might even find some of her companions. She nodded and walked away to follow his instructions. As the group continued, Midiam asked Azadin what he planned to do next. Azadin explained that they would use the lumber mill as a base and try to track down the black magic caster. He said that black magic disasters were usually caused by vengeful spirits, people who suffered unjustly before death and did not get a proper burial. Such spirits could return as evil beings and cause harm. He added that if the black magic in this area had been caused by a human, the most likely suspect was the woman who had been treated as a slave for being part of the Herald clan. He believed she had been murdered and might have returned as an evil spirit. In the village, the group was busy making arrows when Midiam spoke to Azadin. She asked him if, in case the spellcaster was still alive, he planned to try to persuade them instead of simply killing them. Azadin asked why she thought that, and she replied that she would have killed the spellcaster herself. But Azadin seemed to value aesthetics and had a sense of honor. Jie thought that there was a high chance the woman had died and become a wraith, but it was also possible that she had learned black magic while alive. Headed that sad memories and a painful past could be pitied, but pity did not justify using someone who was broken or dangerous, and it was often easier to just start fresh. She said that if Azadin managed to persuade her, she would respect him. Azadin thought this was unexpected and felt that even if it was just a little, she understood that protecting people was a beautiful and important thing. Ishmael, however, interrupted and asked her to stop, arguing that there was no point in talking about forgiveness while keeping alive someone who had caused a black magic disaster. Azadin calmly replied that whether they respected him or not did not matter. He was simply doing what he could to protect others. Later, at night, Maya observed that the fog around them was unusually thick and did not seem like normal fog. She noticed Azadin and, surprised by his presence and skill, asked what exactly he was. She realized he did not seem like an ordinary pilgrim and thought that dealing with such situations was normally the responsibility of their Holy Knight Order. She wondered whether it would not be better if someone properly trained were in charge of handling the dangers they faced. Midiam reminded everyone that the well-trained Holy Knight had been locked in a warehouse, and if they had not come, she would probably still be trapped there. Maya looked at her in shock, realizing how dangerous the situation had been. Suddenly, many zombies arrived, and a wyvern appeared as well, creating a deadly scene. Azadin asked the wyvern if it was the Herald clan member who had destroyed the village. The wyvern replied surprised, asking how he knew who she was. Azadin said that the merchants had told them. The wyvern nodded and explained that those fools had enslaved her and destroyed everything she had, simply because she carried the blood of the Herald clan. Azadin asked if she was alive, and the wyvern nodded, but Azadin thought to himself not to show doubt, because most wraiths claimed they were alive too. He then asked how she had gained such power. The wyvern responded angrily, refusing to explain and challenging him to become one of her undead servants if he was that curious, then attacked the group. Azadin tried to calm her, saying that they had nothing to do with those who had mistreated her. Midiam asked Azadin if they should tell the wyvern that they were also members of the Herald clan. Azadin hesitated, worrying about what that would mean for Tarki's half-sister and the Holy Knight, fearing the danger it could bring. Ishmael insisted that they would have to kill them if necessary, but Azadin responded that he had been expecting that and reminded everyone that they should not treat a person's life lightly, even if they were a holy knight of the king's church. He decided that instead of killing anyone, they would have to show themselves to prove their intentions. Using his power, Azadin shot a glowing attack at the zombies, killing many of them in one strike. Azadin had been very skilled with a bow and started by shooting many arrows, killing numerous zombies. His companion Ishmael noticed Midiam holding her special bow and realized it was the powerful crescent moon bow, a weapon that was rare and strong. Midiam warned him not to let Maya, the Holy Knight, see it. She continued to shoot arrows and helped in killing several zombies. Azadin, feeling confident, asked the wyvern who it thought was the strongest among them. The wyvern, however, mocked him, calling him Bowboy, and laughed at him for acting proud just because he had shot a few arrows. Suddenly, a large number of monsters appeared, overwhelming the battlefield. The wyvern complained that holding back earlier had ruined their advantage and said they should have sent all the undead from the start. After some time, Azadin, exhausted from the battle, entered a room where Midiam and Ishmael were present. He collapsed onto the ground, showing just how tiring the fight had been. Meanwhile, outside, Tarkia faced a giant monster bear. He admitted it seemed very dangerous and prepared to defend himself. The bear attacked him, but suddenly a huge magical blast occurred. When the dust cleared, Maya appeared standing tall, holding a large glowing magical hammer. She had blocked the bear's attack with it and then slammed the hammer down on the monsters, destroying many of them at once. Azadin, watching her through the window, could not believe what he saw. He thought she was acting recklessly and wondered if she was being foolish by putting herself in so much danger. After Maya had smashed many monsters with her large glowing magic hammer, the wyvern realized that her power was truly impressive. It admitted that she had actually taken down some of its forces, which surprised it. However, the wyvern was not defeated yet. It still had many undead soldiers under its control. Feeling proud and angry at Azadin and his companions, the wyvern scolded them, saying that it must feel humiliating to be beaten by someone they had mocked and looked down on. The wyvern claimed that this was the real strength of the Herald clan, the clan that Azadin and his friends hated. Azadin, holding his bow and an arrow, calmly replied that the wyvern did not really understand the true power of their clan. He shot an arrow at the wyvern, wounding her and making her fall to the ground. He explained that the real power of their people was much greater than what outsiders saw. Their bows were so strong that they could even strike stars from the sky. He shot many more arrows, each one injuring the wyvern further. As he stepped closer, Azadin spoke with pride about his people's achievements. He said that their arrows were so precise and powerful that one arrow could strike another in midair. He reminded the wyvern that under the emperor's command, they had even struck down a divine king, proving that their clan's power was not just talk. Azadin clarified that while outsiders called them the Herald clan, their true name among themselves was Araga, which reflected their strength, honor, and history. Finally, he introduced himself as Azadin, one of the emperor's heralds and one of the 108 elite warriors. The wyvern revealed a shocking truth about herself. She called Azadin a herald and asked if he was really one of her kin. She explained that she had waited for a very long time since she was a child, hoping that members of her clan would come and free her from her miserable life. She said that no matter how long she had waited, her clan never came. Azadin thought to himself that from what he saw, she was already dead, even though she did not seem to realize it. He felt sorrow and apologized for it, acknowledging her suffering. However, the wyvern shouted that an apology meant nothing now. She explained that her body had already rotted and that her soul was steeped in black magic. She expressed that her pain was so deep that she wanted to kill every living thing, and that only death could soothe her suffering. Azadin asked her about her children, and she angrily replied that she did not have them by choice. She said that they were the spawn of the hybris bastards who had violated her, and her bitterness and rage were aimed at the world because of what had been done to her. Azadin responded with concern for the future, pointing out that her children would suffer just for having Araga blood. He warned that they might endure 10,000 nights of suffering, humiliation, and hatred for the clan, just like she had. He urged her to think about the pains she might pass down and pleaded with her to surrender, asking her to tell him where her children were. He promised in the name of Emperor Yaislat that he would find and rescue them. Hearing this, the wyvern asked if he really would save her children. Azadin nodded to show he understood, but the wyvern, still doubtful, told him to be quiet and said that what he claimed was impossible. Azadin replied that it was indeed possible. He explained that their clan had achieved things that others thought were impossible, and that nothing had changed. Even if the hybris people scorned and hated them, their beliefs still shone brightly and had not been lost. Miriam, observing the exchange silently, thought to herself about belief. She questioned whether true belief had ever really existed in their world. She believed that a herald's duty was not a choice but something forced on them by a curse. She reflected on how most people, even in the founding clans, had abandoned pride and only chased power and wealth. Miriam thought that if their clan could reclaim a copy of the Sacred King's tome and break the service curse, they would use their overwhelming power to take back everything that had been taken from them and punish the hybris for all the suffering they had endured. In her mind, it was a cruel system where only the strong could seek revenge, and promises of hope were often lies. Yet she realized that when Azadin spoke, everything sounded convincing, and his words carried a weight she could not ignore. Meanwhile, the wyvern, thinking of her children, decided to surrender. She knelt down and cried, placing her trust in Azadin's pride and conviction. She begged him to save the children she had been unable to hold in her arms, expressing both her fear and hope. After the wyvern surrendered, the black magic she had cast on the surrounding people began to disappear, and they returned to normal. This shows that her power, though strong, was no longer threatening once she trusted Azadin. Sitting near her and holding her hand, Azadin asked her gently how many children she had and whether she remembered where they had been sold. The wyvern nodded and told him that she had gathered some clues about her children and had hidden them in a warehouse so she would not forget their location. When Azadin asked about the source of her black magic, she explained that it came from a magical book that had whispered to her. She said that it called itself a copy of the Sacred King's tome. Suddenly, the wyvern burst into flames and fell unconscious. This happened because someone else had used magic against her, showing that even after her surrender, she was still in danger from enemies who wanted to manipulate her powers. At that moment, a man mocked Azadin, saying it was foolish of him and claiming that the woman was not truly part of their clan. He also suggested that Azadin could not detect or use magic, implying that he had failed to recognize the threat in time. Azadin asked the man in front of him who he was. The man introduced himself as Calypso, saying that he was the 106th Herald of the Herald clan. He explained that he was purging wraiths and collecting copies of the Sacred King's tome. Azadin was surprised and upset, telling him that this was his jurisdiction and questioning why Calypso was interfering in his area. Calypso mocked Azadin, saying that he had heard Azadin was not very good at his job. He reminded Azadin that he had failed to control the servant beside him when she went berserk and criticized him for standing by without acting. Azadin realized that the people around Calypso looked familiar. He remembered that they were the ones who had almost been defeated by Midiam at the relay station village. He concluded that they had joined Calypso to get revenge on him and his companions. Azadin also thought about the wyvern and felt sad because her soul was already gone. She was now just an ordinary corpse. He regretted that there were still things he wanted to say to her, but he had lost the chance. Calypso continued to insult Azadin, calling him incompetent and reminding him that the woman was not truly Araga. He said she did not carry the symbol of the yellow bird amidst wind and moon, which meant she had no real connection to the clan. According to Calypso, Azadin never needed to get involved with her in the first place, and he should feel grateful that Calypso had spared him the trouble, even if the warning came too late. Suddenly, pages from a book appeared from the wyvern's body. As Calypso tried to grab them, the pages flew straight toward Azadin on their own as if drawn to him. Midiam stepped forward and spoke firmly, pointing out that the book pages from the wyvern seemed to recognize their true owner. She commented on how spiritual and powerful the Sacred King's tome was, reminding everyone that its strength was what made it sacred. She warned that if Calypso was also Araga, he should not recklessly burn the Emperor's lands, especially during a drought, and scolded him for being careless. Calypso angrily responded, telling Midiam to be silent. He dismissed her as a mere servant and said that her title or name meant nothing to him, and he was insulted that she dared to give him orders. Azadin interrupted the argument and addressed Calypso directly. He recalled that he recognized him from before, noting that Calypso had been one batch below him in rank. Calypso proudly shouted that his rank was still higher than Azadin's. Azadin then focused on a more important matter, questioning Calypso about the woman who had died early. He demanded that if she had any information about the children, Calypso should reveal it. Azadin reminded everyone that the wyvern had suffered 10,000 nights alone in the name of Araga, bearing insults and enduring pain for their clan. He emphasized that abandoning her or ignoring her suffering because of bloodline would dishonor the Araga clan. Calypso laughed mockingly at Azadin's words and called him unbelievable, saying that the clan's biggest fool dared to speak of Araga's honor. He then challenged Azadin to a duel, proposing a high-stakes wager. Azadin would risk the Sacred King's tome he had just obtained, and Midiam, the servant of Etar, while Calypso would wager his rank. He promised that if Azadin won, he would reveal the location of the wyvern's children and Azadin would become the 106th Herald, replacing Calypso. Azadin questioned why Calypso was even mentioning Etar's daughter in the first place. Calypso explained that he wanted to make her his servant, claiming that he intended to teach her how to respect her elders and honor the clan's mission. Azadin turned to Midiam, gently placing his hand on her head, and told Calypso to forget it. He explained that the Sacred King's tome had already chosen him, so there was no reason to wager it in a duel. He added that if he found the journal the wyvern had mentioned, he would not need Calypso's information at all, and told him to leave, saying he was busy. Despite this, Calypso gritted his teeth and proposed a new condition. He said that if he lost the duel, he would find the wyvern's children, free them from slavery, and bring them to the clan's sanctuary. Azadin responded immediately, adding that Calypso must also become their guardian and raise them properly as Araga children. Calypso agreed to the condition and asked how Azadin wanted to conduct the duel, suggesting a traditional standoff at 100 paces. The battle began, but before Calypso could fully prepare, Azadin struck him directly in the face, knocking him unconscious to the ground. Azadin then declared that it was over and reminded Calypso to keep his promise. One of Calypso's men wondered if Azadin had used a hidden weapon or some trick to defeat them. Azadin asked him if he would keep his promise, emphasizing that he expected honesty. One of the men shouted that an ambush did not count as a fair fight. Azadin replied that he had ambushed them to knock them out cleanly without causing serious injuries, and even joked that he could have smashed their faces directly instead. The man looked shocked but said that he would honor his promise properly. Azadin then carefully examined one of the soldiers and confirmed that there were no bleeding wounds or fractures and that he himself was fine. Midiam, noticing his careful inspection, asked if Azadin studied medicine. Azadin explained that he had not studied medicine exactly, but he had trained his observation skills. When someone tried to see far, their focus narrowed, and when they looked closely, their field of vision widened, allowing him to see injuries or even bones inside a body with enough practice. Azadin continued examining others, checking Kaka and Chico, who had suffered serious injuries from colliding with a bear while wearing light armor. He also checked Maya, who did not have major injuries, but he warned there was a risk of mental shock from a previous self-detonation incident. Meanwhile, Ishmael questioned whether they really needed to keep Azadin alive, suggesting it might not be necessary. Midiam, concerned and determined, shouted for Azadin and Ishmael to hurry because it was time to move out. Later, while everyone was riding in the carriage, the woman noticed how strange and unexpected events kept happening around them. She wondered if these unusual events were a sign that something very chaotic and dangerous was about to happen. Azadin, who seemed calm and aware of the situation, explained that it was not just a sign. The chaos had already begun. Nearby, Calypso woke up as Azadin spoke. Azadin showed him a set of belongings that his servants had found in a warehouse, which were very important and disturbing. Among these items was an umbilical cord wrapped carefully in bandages. Written on the bandages were the birth dates of children and the names of the merchants who had sold them. There was also a note containing information that the merchants had been able to remember. Azadin said that he would go and check on the children on the Salasma side, while Calypso should take care of the other matters. He told Calypso that there were no hard feelings between them. Calypso nodded silently and walked away to carry out his task. After that, Azadin took a deep breath and looked around at the quiet carriage, noticing that everyone else was asleep. He thought to himself that everyone had already been through so much, and he needed to rest too. Later, when the carriage stopped at a new location, Maya, still in shock from everything that had happened, asked if they had really defeated the undead, unable to believe that such a dangerous battle had been won. After the battle, a man explained that it had been thanks to the mercenaries they had hired that things had gone well, although he admitted that their own group had also done most of the work. He added that when they had pulled the body out from under the old tree, the black magic that had caused so much trouble had disappeared. Maya felt relieved upon hearing this and said so. Kaka then asked what everyone's next plans were. He explained that their group planned to stop at an inn nearby because they were injured and needed to recover, and also to report back to the guild. He also asked if Maya would be returning straight to the Salasma diocese. Maya explained that she wanted them to go ahead to Salasma first, but she herself needed to go find her father. Azadin asked if she was leaving immediately. She nodded and said that once she had made up her mind, she thought it was best to act quickly and that they might meet again if fate allowed it. Azadin smiled warmly and wished her the Archangel's grace, showing his support and hope for her safety. After that, she walked away, determined and focused on her mission. Later, as the group was preparing to leave, Kaka approached Azadin and spoke to him. He said that Azadin did not seem like an ordinary pilgrim and confessed, a little embarrassed, that his younger sister had the ability to read fortunes and predict the near future. Then Chico, likely Kaka's sister or another companion, told Azadin that in the near future he would become a great knight, or perhaps he already was one. Azadin thanked them sincerely for their kind words. As they continued walking, Azadin noticed that the owl was missing and wondered where it had gone. Tarkiev spoke up, saying that the ghosts they were traveling with were struggling because it was extremely dry, and they would need to find water soon. He added that it had not been this dry when he came from the east. Azadin suggested checking a stream they saw up ahead. When they arrived, they saw that the stream water was dirty, and Azadin realized that it was unsuitable for the goats, as they would get sick if they drank it. Suddenly, a man and a woman arrived and started catching fish from the stream. Midiam, observing this, remarked that the fish would die anyway, so they might as well catch and eat them quickly. Ishmael noted that if the river was not completely dry, then the well in the village should still have water. Azadin said that they would need the villagers' permission to use it. Tarkiev, however, interrupted in a bold and humorous way, saying there was no need to worry because they already had a knight with them. Then he shouted at the man, calling him a lowly peasant fool, and declared that as a noble, he would use the well water and demanded that it be handed over quietly. Ishmael noticed that Azadin was pretending to be a blind pilgrim again, and Midiam commented that the trick worked really well. Later, when they reached the village, a man gave them a large amount of food and told them to take it all with them. Azadin thanked him but asked if it was really okay to give them so much. The man explained that the food would just rot if it was left there and told them to enjoy it, like at a crayfish festival. While eating, Midiam asked Azadin what he planned to do next. Azadin said that he would find the child of the woman who had died, probably somewhere nearby. Ishmael asked what they would do once they found the child, noting that they could not carry the child with them. Azzedine calmly explained that the Khorasar Peddlers Guild was supposed to pass through the town square and they could leave the child with the guild, so that eventually Calypso would take custody of the child. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Calypso was walking with her companion when a man shouted at her, questioning if it was really true that she had lost to Azzedine, the 108th Herald, and asked if she was really just going to give up like that. Another man reminded Calypso that they had gone through great effort to obtain a bone wand to track the Sacred King's tome. He explained that wasting time in one place could cause them to fall behind the other heralds, and emphasized that their goal was to gain merits quickly so they could join the founder clan, House Sabin. He also pointed out that this was Calypso's goal as well, and acknowledged that she had risked her life to come this far. Calypso accepted the situation and said that a loss was a loss, and there was nothing she could do to change it. She instructed the group to make sure the Khorasar Peddlers Guild remained silent, and did not say a word about Azzedine, because she did not want to appear foolish in front of others. As they continued walking, they suddenly heard a mysterious voice greet them and call out specifically to 106th Herald Calypso. Startled, Calypso asked who it was, and the voice revealed itself as Ariel's voice. Calypso was shocked when she heard the voice and asked if it really was Ariel speaking. The mysterious voice confirmed that it was indeed Ariel. Calypso asked what business Ariel had with her, and the voice said that it had come with an offer she would not be able to refuse, making her feel both curious and cautious. Meanwhile, in the village, Azzedine noticed something and asked a man to wait, explaining that the child they were looking for had been taken in by the Telbaran Guild. The man insisted that they did not know anything. Midiam observed that the villagers were avoiding the topic entirely, and she suspected that they were hiding something. Azzedine agreed, noting that based on the information from the woman who had died, this should be the correct place to find the child. Suddenly, Tarkiev shouted angrily at the villagers, calling them lowly scum and demanding that they answer, daring them to refuse before a descendant of the Divine King. Then, an old man spoke up and said that the person who ran the village bakery traded a lot with the Telbaran Guild, pointing toward a chimney to show the exact place. Azzedine reasoned that since the child was only 8 years old, she probably had not suffered serious abuse and had likely only been made to do chores. When they reached the bakery, a man stepped outside and asked what was going on. Azzedine showed him a chit and explained that they were looking for a girl around 8 years old and that all the details were written there. The man revealed the shocking truth that the child they were searching for was already dead, explaining that she had been frail from birth. Tarkiev, outraged, demanded to know what about all the other children in the warehouse. The man explained that those children were orphans he had taken in, fed, and given work, basically caring for those who had nowhere else to go. Azzedine asked how the man had handled the child's funeral, but the man snapped at him, asking why he would even ask such a question. Angered by the man's callousness, Tarkiev kicked him and grabbed his hair, shouting that the child's parents had made a promise with someone of high status, and that they had come specifically to retrieve her. He demanded that at the very least the man tell them where she had been buried. The man coldly admitted that he had simply thrown the child into the river. Azzedine was horrified, asking if the man was insane, and thought about the cruelty of the Telbaran Guild, who bought children cheaply, used them as they wished, and tossed them into the river when they died. He reflected that in a world where the dead could rise without remembering their deaths, this was a cruel and terrifying reality. Ishmael then asked Azzedine what he planned to do, worried that he might kill the man, but also concerned about the other children in the village. He questioned whether Azzedine really intended to save them all, even though they were not part of their clan. Azzedine responded calmly, saying that either way, this man had dealings with the Telbaran Guild, making him a target. Ishmael asked Azzedine if he really planned to rescue the children, pointing out that if he did, he would probably hand them over to the Khorasar Peddlers Guild. He warned that this could create conflict with the guild and asked whether Azzedine thought the guild would allow it. Ishmael explained that this was a problem that could not be solved by justice or sympathy alone and asked Azzedine, as someone experienced, to share his insight. Azzedine agreed and said that the man they were dealing with had likely been chosen as a servant candidate, confirming that Ishmael's analysis was correct. Suddenly, Tarkiev lost his temper and kicked the man in the face, shouting that his big brother had sworn to protect the children and the man was treating that promise like nothing. He declared that today was the day the man would pay for it. The man screamed in pain and begged to be spared. Later, Azzedine reflected that Tarkiev's threats had successfully forced the man to confess to child trafficking. Azadin then planned to send the rescued children to Baroness Tarki's estate and realized that they just needed to communicate this plan to the Karasar Peddlers Guild to make it official. That night, a man appeared and shouted at Azadin, asking if he did not recognize them and reminding him that they had treated him kindly as his seniors. Midiam interjected, saying that these men were neither heralds nor servants. The man, pointing his sword, said that Azadin still did not understand and revealed that he had been dismissed from the heralds, warning him to come quietly. Azadin faced a group of men in the middle of a village who wanted to capture him. One man suggested that if they succeeded in taking Azadin in, they would become heralds, which means they would gain status and recognition. This revealed their main goal: they were not just attacking randomly, they wanted power and position. Azadin realized this and confronted them, asking if this was really why they had drawn their swords in the village. One of the men reminded Azadin of their past, how they used to beat him every day, making him cry. They tried to mock him, but Azadin responded by showing that he remembered everything. The pain he endured, even being embarrassed over his appearance and the small humiliations he had faced. He told them that they needed a serious beating now. The fight quickly escalated. The men attacked Azadin with swords, but he skillfully blocked their strikes. Then he used a powerful magic technique called Yellow Bird amidst wind and moon, Kaza style. This caused a huge blast, knocking one of the men to the ground. Another man, shocked, asked how Azadin could use magic when he had previously said he could not. Azadin continued his attack, hitting them and throwing them around, causing them pain and making them moan. Despite their suffering, he noticed they were still conscious, which impressed him. They were tough opponents. With a teasing tone, he said that with such a terrain it was hard to hold back, and then demanded that they tell him the full story. At that moment, a crow suddenly appeared. The crow spoke to Azadin, calling him the 108th Herald, and warned him that something serious had happened. Azadin immediately recognized the voice as the Emperor's, though it came through the crow rather than directly. He was surprised and wondered why the Emperor was speaking through an intermediary instead of appearing in person. The Emperor's voice spoke through the crow and told Azadin that the council had dismissed him. He added that there was more serious news. The service curse had been activated. The Emperor explained that the service curse was part of the service contract between the Herald clan and the Emperor. It was called a curse because it forced absolute loyalty on the person it was cast upon. If the chieftain and elders of the Herald clan agreed to impose it on someone, that person would be required to produce a successor before dying. The Emperor also mentioned that there was a specific way that the vacancy would be filled. Azadin asked in disbelief if he was being told that he had been cursed with the service curse. The Emperor's voice confirmed that the curse would activate in 1 year. Azadin would be forced to bear a herald and then die, just like his father Aker had. This shocking revelation caused Tarkiev to shout in complete shock. He asked how it was even possible for a man to give birth, who the father would be, and even wondered if they should be asking who the mother was. Azadin shouted back angrily, questioning why the Emperor had ever made the contract in such a cruel way. The Emperor replied that this penalty was not made by him. It had been established by the first chieftain, Harkonia, and it was something the Emperor was not allowed to explain further. Azadin, frustrated and desperate for answers, begged the Emperor to just tell him the truth, saying, "Come on, just say it already." The Emperor's voice explained to Azadin that the Emperor's voice spell could only exist by not directly conveying certain information. It was a special kind of magic that allowed artificial spirits to exist in the world forever. The Emperor admitted that even speaking to Azadin after his dismissal was already weakening his own existence. Azadin reacted angrily, saying that this did not change the fact that the curse meant he would have to give birth and then die, even though he was a man. He shouted that the Emperor had cursed him to die and yet still acknowledged him, asking if he was joking. He felt completely overwhelmed and exclaimed that he was drowning in this mess. Turning to one of the men nearby, Azadin demanded more answers. He asked why they had suddenly fired a herald who had been working hard abroad and then added a curse on top of it. The man explained that the reason was connected to Azadin's twin sister, Arel. Arel had killed Elder Kenahan, stolen all the copies of the Sacred King's tome that they had secured, and then fled. By doing this, she had committed treason against the Herald clan. Azadin was overwhelmed with anger and frustration. He felt completely betrayed and humiliated. His anger erupted when he confronted the man responsible for his dismissal. Azadin's core complaint was that he had never been rewarded or treated fairly while Arel succeeded. Instead, he had been insulted and treated as a snot-nosed brat, and Arel had even threatened to marry him off to humiliate him further. When Azadin physically grabbed the man by his collar, It emphasized both his rage and his willingness to act directly, not just speak. The man, trying to provoke or test him, threw Azadin to the ground and mocked the idea of rebellion. He even suggested that Azadin could go on a violent rampage against other clan members. Another man tried to reason with Azadin, pointing out that the clan's service curse had only ever killed one person, implying that Azadin's situation was not hopeless. But this reasoning only fueled Azadin's anger, because the person who had died from the curse was his father. This revelation was a pivotal moment, showing that Azadin's frustration was not just about his own dismissal, but also tied to deep personal trauma and loss. Finally, by the morning, Azadin calmed down and realized the harsh truth of his situation. Despite his strength, skills, and anger, he was still subject to the clan's hierarchy and rules. The only way to survive was to swallow his pride and appealed to the chieftain to reverse his dismissal. The man tried to give Azadin advice, saying it would be a wise decision to pretend that the clan had captured him when he went to meet the chieftain. He wanted Azadin to appear submissive for his own safety. However, Azadin immediately interrupted, asking angrily if the man wanted to be castrated right then and there. The man was shocked and said that such a punishment was far too cruel. Azadin replied that after the way the man had treated him as a child, even castration would be too lenient. The man then tried to reason with Azadin, explaining that the clan had only wanted to catch him for his own safety because the entire clan had been ordered to either capture or eliminate him. He warned that if Azadin tried to fight every clan member he encountered, some might actually succeed in killing him. Azadin, however, was determined to act on his own terms. He argued that if he went in weak, the clan would treat him even worse. He declared that he would face the Salisma regional head on his own and that anyone who got in his way would be kicked aside. He explained that he did not care about anyone except Aldous and his teacher. Finally, the man acknowledged Azadin's determination, nodding and shouting from the moving carriage that Azadin was truly a model herald if there ever had been one. Azadin arrived at the city of Salasma and thought about it carefully. He noticed that it was a city with about 3,000 households surrounded by farms, and had been prosperous since ancient times because of its vast copper mines. As he observed, Tarkiev rode up to the city gate and loudly introduced himself as the son of Count Kazil. He claimed he had urgent business and demanded that the way be cleared. The soldiers at the gate immediately allowed him to pass, showing respect for his status. Azadin thought to himself that Tarkiev was actually useful, praising his impressive acting skills and noting that the Khorasar men did not dare approach him. While riding through the city, Tarkiev jokingly suggested shaking down a few more people to collect some extra money, pointing out some citizens who seemed to have valuables. Miriam observed and commented that they were just looting like they always did, showing her awareness of Tarkiev's usual behavior. Suddenly, a girl sitting on a horse called out Tarkiev's name. Tarkiev turned to her in surprise, realizing that it was Boone, his half-sister, and asked what she was doing there. She responded sharply, telling him not to pretend he didn't know, and asked what had happened to the mercenaries he had brought along. Tarkiev explained that something had come up, leaving the situation unclear. Boone then revealed that she had heard that Kozil had been completely defeated and assumed that Tarkiev had caused it, but he had not. She explained that Kozil had lost all his men and had suffered severe personal damage, leaving everything in chaos. This led her to conclude that Tarkiev was now completely alone. Boone suddenly drew her sword and attacked Tarkiev, showing that she was serious and dangerous. However, Azadin quickly intervened by throwing a stone, which knocked the sword out of her hand. Surprised and angry, she demanded to know who he was. Azadin calmly remarked that it made sense why she had been walking so close, hinting that he had anticipated her actions. Tarkiev, shocked and in disbelief, realized that Boone was actually trying to kill him and questioned her motives. Boone replied that she thought attacking him directly was better than chasing after some sacred tome whose location nobody even knew. During the chaos, one man tried to attack Tarkiev, but Tarkiev skillfully blocked the strike with his sword. He shouted at Boone that she was making a mistake and reminded her that he was not alone, he was with powerful allies. He emphasized that someone like Boone could easily be defeated by him, showing his confidence and skill as a fighter. Then, realizing Azadin's presence, Tarkiev called out to him for help, asking what he was doing. Azadin, crossing his arms and remaining calm, admitted that he had been curious to see how Boone would handle herself in a fight. Miriam then commented that Azadin was no longer alone and warned that, because he had been affected by the service curse, there might already be something happening inside him, hinting at potential danger or complications. Azadin shouted in frustration, denying her implication and calling it a horrifying idea. A sudden fight broke out when a man tried to attack Azadin, but Azadin quickly dodged the strike. Staying calm, He ordered Midiam and Ishmael to take care of the attackers but warned them not to kill anyone. They nodded in agreement and moved into action. While watching the battle, Azadin carefully observed his enemies. He wondered why one man seemed to struggle so much on horseback and realized that the fighter with the best skill among them was the one with droopy eyes. Meanwhile, Ishmael was attacked but managed to dodge with ease. In the middle of the chaos, Tarkiev suddenly fell off his horse, making a clumsy mistake. Azadin could not believe it and thought to himself that Tarkiev must be an idiot for failing with equipment that good. Realizing it was now his turn, Azadin drew his sword and prepared to fight. The battle ended with all the enemies injured and defeated. After the fight, Boone cried out in frustration, demanding to know why Azadin was doing this to her. She shouted that she had already given everything back, even restacked the hay cart, and accused him of treating her like a dog. She was furious that he had even torn off her nail, calling him a monster. Azadin responded coldly, telling her she should be grateful it had ended with just that punishment. He explained that he repaid sins in exact measure. She was still alive only because she had not killed anyone. Midiam was left behind with Azadin. She commented that his mood swings had become worse, but also noted that it seemed like his heart was slowly starting to heal. Azadin was shocked by her words, but before he could respond, Midiam added something even more unexpected. She told him not to worry too much because, as her mother had always said, pregnancy naturally caused many mental and physical changes. Azadin grew frustrated and shouted that it was not what Midiam had suggested earlier. He explained that giving birth through the cervix curse was not like a normal pregnancy, so such changes would not happen to him. Ishmael then changed the subject and questioned Azadin about his actions. He asked why Azadin had gone so far as to return all of Bune's stolen goods when, in the past, he had sold off the silver candlesticks that mercenaries had looted. Azadin calmly explained his reasoning. He said that back then, it had been impossible for him to return so many items on his own, especially since there had been too many mercenaries involved. He added that aside from the candlesticks, most of the stolen goods had been heavy furniture, which would have been a burden to refugees who were trying to flee. He told Ishmael that he had always been someone who acted flexibly depending on the situation and asked if Ishmael had a problem with that. Ishmael admitted that he could not understand Azadin at all. He said Azadin seemed like something foreign and unfamiliar to him. In fact, he even claimed that murderers and looters were easier to understand than Azadin. Azadin, however, replied calmly that he at least felt like he understood Ishmael to some degree. Suddenly Tarkiev interrupted them and told everyone to be quiet, warning that a rescue order unit was up ahead. As they approached, Azadin became excited when he saw the three-winged wheel insignia, recognizing it as the mark of the rescue order. He admired their presence and called it impressive. Midiam noticed his reaction and commented that she already knew Azadin admired them, though she still seemed slightly surprised by his enthusiasm. Ishmael, however, was not impressed and remarked that the rescue order members were still Hybridians and that their reputation was not particularly good. Azadin then focused on his situation and said that his dismissal had probably been a hasty decision by the higher ranks, who were panicking and afraid of Arael. He expressed confidence that once he met the regional head, he would be able to fix the service curse issue. In his thoughts, Azadin reflected on what he had already achieved. He had gathered 2 copies of the Sacred King's Tome and 3 gold coins in a short amount of time. He knew that even among the heralds this level of accomplishment was rare, perhaps unprecedented. He believed that this success would give him enough leverage to negotiate with the upper ranks. He reassured himself that they would not kill him just to take his tomes. Later, while they were carrying supplies, Midiam turned to Azadin and asked if he had managed to get bread, reminding him that they already had their own rations. Azadin explained that he had not taken it for food but because he had been curious about what kind of relief bread the rescue order gave out. He made it clear that he had not looted anything. Instead, he had given a donation. He even asked if their seal could be branded onto his parchment, but the rescue order members had refused. Midiam looked shocked and warned him that while the rescue order might appear heroic in books, in reality, they would try to kill them the moment they discovered that they were heralds. Azadin, however, remained calm and answered that it did not matter. He said that even if the rescue order persecuted or killed him, it would not betray his own beliefs. Azadin and his companions were boiling food when a group of hungry child beggars came to them, crying out that they were starving. Azadin immediately tried to give them bread, but Tarkiev resisted the idea. Azadin then calmly explained that even though he was not a refugee, he had taken relief supplies from the rescue order, so it was only fair to return the favor by sharing. He promised to pack some extra food for the children to take back with them. The kids accepted gratefully, and one of them thanked him with great joy as he took the bread. Suddenly, an old man appeared and approached Azadin. He told him that what he was doing was a very noble act, though he admitted he had not expected Azadin to walk so openly along the main road while being wanted by his clan. Azadin immediately realized that the person he had been searching for had just appeared on his own. At that moment, one of the old man's attendants leaned in angrily and demanded that Azadin show respect, addressing the old man properly as the regional head Salem. The attendant accused Azadin of roughing up guild members, claiming that he had acted arrogantly as a herald, beating them as he pleased. Salem himself then ordered his men to clear the area of bystanders, creating an atmosphere of tension and authority. Azadin quietly told Tarkiev something, and in response Tarkiev shouted at the children to run away, warning them in his usual outrageous manner. He yelled that the old man craved children's meat and would roast them over a campfire if they got too close. Frightened by his words, the children quickly apologized and backed away. Later, Azadin sat down in front of Salem and looked at the scene. He remarked that it was quite a noble class setup, pointing out the formality and prestige surrounding Salem. But Salem, sipping his tea with a cold demeanor, told Azadin to shut his mouth. He admitted openly that he was itching to kill Azadin right there on the spot, and that if Azadin had not been hiding himself in such a crowded place, he would already be dead. Azadin confronted the regional head directly and asked if he really had time to waste on such things. He argued that Arael could not have betrayed the clan alone, and that dealing with her should come first. Salem, the head, shouted angrily and accused Azadin of being in league with Arael. Azadin immediately denied it and asked Salem to revoke his dismissal, saying he was not on Arael's side. But Salem demanded to know why he should do that. He explained that even though he had heard Azadin and Arael did not get along, that could just as easily be a trick to fool everyone. Azadin laughed at the suggestion and called it a ridiculous idea. He pointed out that the entire clan already looked down on him, so did anyone really believe planting him inside the clan would give Arael any valuable information? Grinding his teeth in frustration, Salem pressed further. Even if Azadin was not working with Arael, he asked why he should bother pleading to the elders on his behalf. Azadin replied firmly that it was because it was the right thing to do. He reminded Salem that a young clansman and herald was about to die falsely accused, and that it would be shameful if the regional head simply turned a blind eye. But Salem did not agree. He reminded Azadin that he was Arael's brother, and that alone opened up many possibilities for suspicion. He also explained that if the elders and the chief suddenly retracted their decision, the entire authority of the organization would weaken. Now, more than ever, was the time to restore discipline and hierarchy in the clan. Azadin then challenged this reasoning. He asked sarcastically if his dismissal alone would magically restore the honor that Arael had destroyed. He declared that he would not publicly resist the dismissal, but in return Salem must rescind the kill order immediately and also promised to revoke the dismissal within 6 months. Finally, Azadin demanded that this agreement be put in writing. Salem shouted in anger, demanding how Azadin dared to ask for a written contract when his word should have been enough. Azadin, refusing to back down, shouted back that his life was on the line and that mere words would not be enough to protect him. This only enraged Salem further. He roared at Azadin to stay silent, accusing him of constantly criticizing the elders and the chief, and now going so far that he had truly crossed the line. Salem warned that if Azadin were not hiding in such a public place, he would have already killed him. Azadin stood up and shouted that it was perfect, and challenged Salem to step outside the awning and settle things directly. Salem was furious at the boldness. He shouted that Azadin dared to challenge him, declaring that even though he was old, he would not lose to someone like Azadin. Calling him insolent, Salem swore that he would kill him himself. Just as the tension was about to erupt into violence, a new voice suddenly cut through the air. A young woman appeared and greeted Azadin, saying it had been a long time since they last met. Salem immediately recognized her and bowed, addressing her with respect as Lord Aldous. But Aldous quickly told him not to do that, reminding him that there were too many people watching. With a polite smile, Salem asked what had brought someone as important as Lord Aldous to such a remote place. Aldous explained calmly that she had heard of Azadin's dismissal and could not simply sit back and do nothing. She revealed that as soon as the news reached her, she had run non-stop from Arangui just to see him. Looking at Azadin, she called his dismissal a foolish mistake on the part of the elders. Azadin looked at Aldous with surprise and said it must have taken her 3 full days to come all the way from Arangui. Aldous explained that she had something important to tell him and reassured him not to worry. She said she had personally petitioned the Grand Master, declaring that Azadin would never betray their clan. Then she handed him a covenant that carried the signatures of Chief Hatir and the other elders, explaining that they had sworn before the Emperor's voice to revoke his dismissal within 6 months. Hearing this, Azadin smiled warmly and thanked Aldous, saying she had gone through so much trouble just for him. Aldous gently placed her hand on his shoulder and told him that it had simply been the right thing to do. She admitted that the other elders were too old-fashioned and confessed that she had been worried they might have treated him unfairly with unnecessary insults. At that moment, Midiam stood nearby, clenching her teeth as memories of her previous moments with Azadin ran through her mind. Meanwhile, Aldous continued speaking to Azadin. She told him that she hoped he understood how the older generation of the clan was very sensitive about hierarchy and traditions. Azadin gave a small nod, acknowledging her words. Then Aldous smiled and brushed his hair affectionately, saying that when she had first seen him and his brother Arel, she had many worries about how they would turn out. But now, looking at him, she admitted that he had grown so much. Harkonia. She was known as the first leader of the clan and the one who deciphered the ancient magic tome called Huajo Fungwol, a book gifted by the emperor himself. Through her work, the Herald clan gained the ability to use the tome's full power, and because of this, the clan honored her purple eyes by calling them the Eyes of Harkonia. Every generation, the strongest member of the Herald clan was given the title Harkonia Reborn. Aldous, who carried noble Jeddah blood, had the rare violet eyes and showed incredible skill, naturally earned this title. Because of her talent, Hatir, who was the Grandmaster and leader of the Herald clan, took Aldous in as his personal disciple. He gave her the important task of deciphering the copies of the Divine King's scripture. Among the researchers who had worked with them, there was one who betrayed the clan. This man was Akra, who managed to steal a copy of the scripture. However, his betrayal brought him a miserable fate. It was revealed that he had been running from the heralds for a whole year before he was finally caught and killed. When the king arrived at Akra's lifeless body, he spoke with disappointment, saying that it was shameful for a mere researcher to have escaped the pursuit of the powerful heralds for such a long time. He admitted that they never realized Akra had such hidden skill to survive for a year on the run. Aldous then sat down near the body of Akra and spoke with a heavy heart. She said that the children who were now present were born from the curse of service. The king agreed and answered that seeing them now, the effects of the curse could no longer be denied. However, he looked at Aldous with suspicion and warned her not to think about taking those children with her. He reminded her that the twins might carry the blood of Akra and could even be his reincarnation. He insisted that Akra's bloodline must be ended completely, and no trace of it should survive. The king also pointed out that the curse was supposed to create only one child, yet these were twins, making their existence even more unnatural and dangerous. After Akra's death, Aldous carefully picked up one of the newborn children. As she looked at the infant, she noticed something shocking and told her master that the child had been born without eyes. The king was alarmed and exclaimed that this was exactly what he had feared, because twins were already considered an ill omen. Aldous, however, strongly objected. She told him that having no eyes was not enough reason to let the child die. She explained that she could still feel a strange gaze coming from the infant, which meant that the baby might be able to see in some way, even without eyes. The king dismissed her words as nonsense. He reminded her that with their Aragassian fate, it was better for such children to die quickly before bringing more misfortune. But then, as he looked at the second child, he was stunned to see something different. This baby had the same violet-colored eyes as Harkonia, the eyes of legend. The king found it surprising and admitted that the child carried the eyes of Harkonia. Aldous, seeing this, responded that the child's eyes were indeed the same color as her own. She pleaded with her master, reminding him that they were only helpless infants. If left abandoned, they would surely die. She asked if she could take them in and protect them. The king finally gave in. He told her to do as she wished, reasoning that since they had already lost the stolen copy of the scripture, perhaps keeping the children would at least count as gaining something. But he also warned her that even if she decided to take them, their existence would not be without consequence. The scene then shifted to the Aragassian sanctuary, where a gathering of clan members was held around a great table. The moment Aldous's decision was revealed, voices rose in anger. One man stood up and shouted at her, calling her choice foolish. He accused her of accepting the offspring of a traitor and claimed it was nonsense. However, he then suggested another possibility, asking aloud if perhaps those children could be incarnations of the Divine King's scripture itself. The king sat silently, watching the arguments unfold, and thought to himself that this was exactly what he had expected. He realized that Aldous's stubbornness had gone too far, and even with her talent and title, she could not be allowed to ignore the will of the clan forever. But Aldous stood firm. She declared that she would give the twins names. She said that a child who died nameless might still find salvation, but these children were born already carrying the hatred of the entire clan. That was why she would take the responsibility of naming them herself. The king became extremely angry. He slammed his fist on the table and shouted that it was absolutely forbidden under any circumstance. He reminded Aldous that she was a Yedaha, descended from the noble founder's bloodline and a bearer of Harkonia's eyes. He said that her talent could not be wasted on such a task and that naming the twins would be a misuse of her abilities. Aldous, however, calmly asked her master if he was truly against it. The king questioned why she would go so far to protect the children when it brought her no benefit. Aldous replied that she did not fully know the reason herself, but she believed that protecting a young life in need was simply the right thing to do. She explained that because Akra had been her friend, she could somewhat understand what had driven him to betray the clan, and even now, she could not bring herself to hate him. The king warned her to speak like that only to him, because if the other elders heard, it could lead to serious trouble. Aldous nodded in agreement. After a pause, the king relented and said that he would name the twins himself. Following this, Aldous revealed the names they would carry. The boy was named Azadin, symbolizing the dragon of ruin and dragon of silence, while the girl was named Ariel, representing the angel of light and darkness. She explained that these names were taken from ancient deities once worshipped by Aragasa before they came to Hybris. The choice of names connected the twins to mythical figures who had battled eternally and perished together, reflecting the extraordinary and dangerous destiny awaiting them. The story then jumped ahead 3 years. By this time, the twins had grown and developed their abilities. Ariel was shown practicing archery with remarkable precision, using mana to guide her arrow to the target. Aldous observed Ariel's abilities with amazement. She noted that Ariel's grimoire and mana were truly incredible, and she believed the girl might be the strongest herald in history. Aldous admitted that Ariel was even stronger than herself and thought that one day, the title of the strongest herald might belong to Ariel instead of her. The king asked her if she felt upset at the idea of having such a powerful rival. Aldous replied that she was not upset and that it was not about rivalry, but rather about recognizing the child's potential. Suddenly, Azadin cried out in pain, complaining that his stomach hurt. Aldous immediately realized the cause and explained that the curse of service was never meant to produce twins. She told the king that Ariel and Azadin were originally one being, and that what existed within Azadin was not the full Huajafengwol grimoire, but only its residue. This incomplete grimoire caused all the different types of mana inside him to scatter uncontrollably, creating a chaotic storm. While this gave Azadin an unusual resistance to dark mana, the king reflected on the situation and remarked that it was ironic that Ariel had taken even Azadin's share of power. Everything had gone to one twin, leaving the other with a harsh and difficult fate. He acknowledged that life had dealt the twins an extremely unfair hand, and that Azadin would have to face a challenging path because of this imbalance. It was clear that the people of Ragasa were stronger than those of Hybris. With the power of the Huajafengwol grimoire, the clan's goal of becoming heralds and constant persecution from the outside, it was natural that the entire clan focused all their strength on achieving power. However, the story pointed out that the pursuit of strength often became distorted. Instead of true mastery, it could turn into blind worship of the strong and oppression of the weak. Azadin experienced cruelty from other children. He was teased and bullied, which made him cry. In those moments of sadness, he looked for his sister, Ariel, and called her name, but she ignored him. One of the children even mocked him directly, saying that he was pathetic. Azadin felt a deep sorrow, and later that night, he went to a lake to be alone. There, he thought about how much it hurt and how there seemed to be nowhere to run. He questioned why he had been born this way and felt as if his heart would break from the pain. Meanwhile, Aldous was climbing a mountain, reflecting on the beauty of the world. She noted that no matter how often she came to this place, it always felt marvelous. Suddenly a voice spoke to her, warning her not to waste the precious blood of the Yegas divine race by giving it to mosquitoes. Then she heard another sound, and the voice informed her that a child had fallen into the water. Aldous immediately jumped into the water and pulled Azadin out. When he woke up, she held him close and scolded him, asking what he had been thinking. She reminded him that training had been tough. Azadin told Aldous that he had been kicked out of the heralds. He said that the other people had told him he could never become a herald, which made him feel rejected and sad. Aldous embraced him gently and reassured him that it was fine. She explained that there were many paths and jobs in life besides becoming a herald, and that he should not feel defeated. She also noticed that his body temperature had dropped dangerously low earlier, so she helped him wrap up warmly. To cheer him up, she suggested that they spend the night looking at the stars together. Azadin, unfamiliar with such moments of calm and wonder, asked if she meant the shining things in the night sky. Aldous smiled and held a book, explaining that she had brought a book about fairy constellations. She told him that stars had their own places and that people connected the stars in the sky to tell stories, creating constellations. She explained that the myths were about fairies who existed long before the Yegas divine race had arrived in their world. As they sat together, Azadin thought about how he had never truly known beauty until that night. Even the star-filled night sky, which might have seemed empty before, now made his heart ache with longing as he counted the stars with Aldous. As Azadin grew older, he began to show more curiosity about the world. One day he returned a book to Aldous with a shy smile, saying that he had really enjoyed reading it. The book was called The Rescue Knight's Primer. Aldous asked him which part he had liked the most while serving him food. Azadin replied that he liked the part about the 3 virtues and how the book said that anyone who upheld these virtues could use white magic. He noted that white magic was what the Yegas divine kings used and thought it was amazing. He expressed a wish that he could use magic too. Aldous then asked him if he wanted to become a rescue knight. Azadin hesitated, explaining that everyone outside hated the Aragasa and that people claimed it was because they were strong, but he also felt that others would hate him simply because he was Aragasa. He recalled being humiliated as a child when others had covered his face with a sack, almost causing him to suffocate. He wondered if anyone could ever accept him given his appearance and origin. Aldous asked him if he hated her, but he denied it. She then held him close and explained that if he hated himself, it would be like also hating her for keeping him alive. She told him she was somewhat like a mother to him and reminded him of the lesson from the book. If he cultivated courage, wisdom, and compassion, he could become anything, even a rescue knight. Later, while Azadin was on the ground, other children attempted to tease and hurt him again. However, they suddenly could not harm him because Arael appeared. She intervened gravely. A scene set a few hours earlier, Arael noticed that Azadin was holding a heretical book and questioned why he had something like that. She snatched the book from him, tore it apart, and hit him lightly, scolding him. Then she asked Azadin directly if he liked Aldous, not as a mother figure, but as a woman. She reminded him that Aldous likely only saw him as a son and asked if he planned to ignore that truth. Arael pointed out that the age gap between Azadin and Aldous was only 12 years, and that Aldous, with her divine blood, would remain beautiful even as she grew older. She asked if he would still see Aldous only as a mother when they became adults. Azadin thought deeply about Arael's words. He realized that it was impossible not to long for Aldous because she was the only person who had shown him that the world could be beautiful. In his mind, Aldous represented the standard of beauty and everything that mattered to him. He reflected that even if he were to develop desires for her someday, he had never intended to show them. He wanted to preserve his feelings without calling them desire, as part of a personal vow he had made to himself. Ariel, noticing his inner struggle, teased him further. She encouraged him to feel his anger and frustration and told him that if he wanted to claim the noble bloodline of the Argasa, he had to become the strongest among them. Azadin shouted in pain, but Ariel hit him with her sword, injuring his eyes. She told him that the scar suited him and that he should be grateful to her. Later, the scene shifted to Azadin's room where he was crying alone. Suddenly a man stepped in and praised him, saying that at least he had spirit and mentioning the 4 dragons of silence. Azadin asked the man who he was, and the man introduced himself as Kajas, an elder. Kajas had heard that Azadin could see without eyes and found it fascinating. Azadin, frightened, exclaimed that Kajas was an elf and begged him not to eat him. Kajas laughed and explained that while it was true that elves once ate human flesh during the Nagashira era, he had quit long ago. Kajas then told Azadin that he had been chosen as his disciple. He promised to teach Azadin the power called Hojapyungwol, which was Kajas's own interpretation of the ancient grimoire. Azadin protested, saying it did not make sense because he could not even use magic. Kajas laughed and explained a secret of magicians that while most forms of attack could kill a magician, his interpretation allowed a different kind of power to work, and it could defeat the Hwajofungwol grimoire itself. Azadin asked if this meant the power could beat Hwajofungwol. Kajas turned away and asked why he was the one begging Azadin to become his disciple. He told Azadin not to believe him if he did not want to and that he could walk away. Kajas also revealed that he had heard about how Azadin had been beaten by his sister, Arael, and that he wanted to give Azadin a chance to become strong enough to even stand up to her, perhaps even to break her nose. Azadin finally stood up and asked the elder to take him as his disciple. Kajas nodded, accepting him. Time then shifted to the present more than 10 years later. Aldous reflected on the past and said that when she first heard Azadin had become Kaya's disciple, she had been shocked. She wondered what Kajas had been like since she knew he was an elf. Azadin answered that Kajas had been a pervert and a madman, but he was still tolerable. At least he did not eat people. Aldous admitted that she had been relieved because when she first heard Azadin had been entrusted to Kajas, she had nightmares every night, fearing that the elder would harm him. Azadin remembered small, strange lessons from Kajas, like when he had said that sweet mugwort snacks were still the best drinking snack, and he thought to himself that it had actually been Aldous who recommended him to the elder. Aldous then quickly shifted the conversation to a more serious matter. She asked Azadin if he knew what Arail had done. Their head reported that Arail had murdered Elder Kenahan and stolen a copy of the Divine King's Codex. This act mirrored what her father had done. Aldous questioned why Arail had done such a thing, pointing out that her motive was unclear. She explained that the Codex required interpretation and that the more people involved in interpreting it, the better. Since Arail was the second in command, she would benefit first once the interpretation was complete. Aldous thought it was unlikely that anyone would surpass her, even after the Codex was fully interpreted. She added that if Arail were truly going to betray them, it would make more sense to wait until the interpretation was complete. The head then warned Aldous that Arail was reckless, and her temper was cruel. No one could predict what she would do next. Azadin considered this carefully and thought that not everyone acted based on logic, especially someone who had run wild like wildfire all her life. Ishmael told that he had heard rumors that the Emperor and Harkonia had a child together, and it amazed him that divine blood actually flowed in their clan. Midiam, observing the situation closely, asked if he had seen Azadin's face earlier and whether he had felt the emotions and tension it expressed. Ishmael confirmed that he had. He then warned Midiam that continuing to serve under Azadin could be dangerous. He explained that the Elder Council would likely issue an execution order targeting Arail, but it would be carried out through Azadin. When Midiam asked if the order would apply to the entire clan, Ishmael said yes, but it would be especially personal for Azadin. He would be expected to prove his innocence by killing his own sibling. Ishmael added that Arail would not have revolted without preparing countermeasures to protect herself, especially considering the curse of service that bound their bloodline. Midiam asked if Ishmael had any idea of what might have motivated Arail. He nodded and said that one reason could be that Azadin might be swayed to her side. Midiam then realized that the elders might intend to use Azadin as a spy within Arail's group. She understood the danger. For Azadin to infiltrate Arail's side, he would likely need to abandon his followers and defect alone, which could put them at risk of being sacrificed in the process. Despite this, Midiam firmly stated that she would never allow such a thing to happen. Later, Aldous stretched and noted that they should have been asleep, but the sun was already rising. Azadin asked if she was alright and suggested that she get some rest. Aldous said she was fine and that talking with him all night had been more enjoyable than sleeping. Azadin then asked where she was heading. Aldous explained that she was going to Batuma to meet Arail. She warned Azadin that the elders might demand he kill Arail to prove his innocence and asked if he would fight her. She admitted that if the two of them ended up fighting, she would be heartbroken. Azadin replied that he would try to avoid fighting, but if Arail attacked him first, he would have no choice but to defend himself. Aldous held his hand and reassured him that it would be alright and that Arail would likely not attack either. Then Azadin mentioned that he had found 2 pages from the Codex of the Divine King and asked Aldous to keep them, thinking they would be safer with her. Aldous initially declined but then gave him a bracelet, explaining that carrying loose pages could be inconvenient. She told him that he could store the Codex pages inside the bracelet, which would also help him avoid detection from the Kurt Divine clan. She said goodbye and told him they would meet again at the sanctuary during the summer solstice festival. Azadin nodded and waved to her. Later, Azadin traveled with his group to Salasma. While sitting in the carriage, he observed the suffering around him. He noticed that the children were starving and that there were so many refugees that a few missing children would not even be noticed. Ishmael reminded Azadin that the district chief had reported many people missing, including adventurers who had been sent to investigate but never returned. Azadin nodded, understanding the danger. Suddenly, a man in the area shouted that the era of Jupiter was almost upon them and warned that when Jupiter entered the ecliptic, the demon gods beneath Nedstrom would awaken and bring about the end. He urged people to repent, uphold the 3 virtues, and give to the poor. Midiam, observing the man's behavior, gritted her teeth and commented that he had not received any real prophecy about the end. She said he was only projecting his ruined life onto the world and hoping for its destruction. Azadin, however, defended human weakness, saying that everyone made foolish mistakes and that if they could not forgive human frailty, nothing could truly begin. When they reached their destination, they stepped out of the carriage. Ishmael noticed that the entrances to the other estates were all blocked as well, not just one. Azadin asked what had happened, and Tarkiev explained that it was said Azadin's mother had gone missing. Azadin decided that they should investigate themselves first. Tarkiev shouted to the guards to open the door, saying he wanted to see for himself. Once inside, Azadin gave orders for the search. He told Midiam and Ishmael to search the first floor while he took the second. While investigating, Azadin found a piece of rat fur on the ground. He immediately recognized it as belonging to the retainers of the Kurt Divine clan, specifically under Mazeri, the Rat King. Tarkiev discovered shocking news: his mother had been kidnapped by the were-rats. He could hardly believe it and asked Azadin if it was really true. Azadin nodded and explained that he could sense magic, and that the mercenary captain who had put the spider inside Tarkiev was actually a spider demon. This revealed that Tarkiev's mother was not just an ordinary noblewoman, she had secret powers and connections with magic and demons. Azadin then opened a hidden lid and found a secret compartment, confirming his suspicion that Tarkiev's mother had hidden valuable or magical items. Tarkiev was confused and wondered why his mother would keep such secrets, and Azadin explained that the Spider Queen Atra was popular among noblewomen because she gave them the power to seduce others. This meant Tarkiev's mother had been blessed by Atra, which made her stronger and more mysterious than anyone thought. Tarkiev asked if his mother had served a different Kurt deity, and if that might have been the reason the were-rats took her. While they were discussing this, Ishmael suddenly shouted to Azadin to come over. When Azadin arrived, Ishmael pointed to something they had found in a vault. Azadin was shocked to see 5 imperial gold coins. He knew that even one of these coins was very rare, but 5 coins were extremely valuable. Tarkiev shouted that the coins were useless in normal life, but he promised to give them to Azadin if he rescued his mother. Azadin thought about it and realized that having these coins in the hands of a follower of Atra showed how powerful and influential Tarkiev's mother really was. She was clearly more impressive than he had first imagined. Later, near a well, Tarkiev noticed a piece of cloth and recognized it as the color of a dress his mother often wore. Emotion. Azadin thought that there was probably a hidden passage beneath them. He explained that considering the number of missing people, the enemy force must be large, but there was still a way to handle it. He wore armor, and Midiam noticed it, saying she had never seen a herald carry armor like that. Azadin explained that his armor was perfect for fighting in confined spaces. As they entered the secret passage, Azadin suggested following the footprints. He noticed that it seemed all the wells were connected, which meant the enemy could move quickly and secretly through them. Ishmael confirmed that all the footprints were heading in the same direction. Suddenly someone shouted, asking who was there, claiming they had seen the light. Azadin realized that they had already been spotted and told Tarkiev to try using his status to stop them. Tarkiev confidently replied that he would handle it, and he shouted that he was Tarki, son of the Margrave of Salisma. The man who had shouted recognized Tarkiev as a Sir Knight and asked what had brought him there. Tarkiev quickly turned the question back at him, demanding to know what the were-rats were doing lurking in the area and scolding them for the greed shining in their eyes. Then, as the confrontation escalated, Tarkiev slashed his sword, and all the men revealed themselves as were-rats. One of the were-rats said that if the heroes wanted to die, they would allow it, and they planned to kill the males and eat the female among them. A rat charged at Tarkiev to attack, but Azadin stepped in, punching the rat in the face so hard that it flew back. He smirked while holding his weapon and said it was perfect. Tarkiev asked if they were going to kill all the enemies, worried that they still did not know where his mother was. Azadin explained that this was why he had been defeating them one by one, but none of the enemies had talked or given information. It seemed that these were just ordinary grunts with no real knowledge. He also noticed a symbol, Mazeri's crest, drawn in blood. Suddenly, Midiam shouted that she had found a barred gate ahead, which led to the riverside. Azadin realized they were running out of time and said they needed to move quickly. When they stepped outside the tunnel, Azadin thought about whether they had acted too openly, but he decided there was no choice. Time was pressing and they had to act fast. Midiam reminded everyone that they now had to find the were-rats, since this was the key to rescuing Tarkiev's mother. Ishmael suggested that the were-rats would likely be active at night and asked if they should lie in wait somewhere to ambush them. While they were planning, a man suddenly shouted that people should repent because the end was near and the age of Jupiter had come. Ishmael recognized him as the doomsayer they had seen earlier on their way in. Midiam commented that he was still loud even at a distance, and she reminded Azadin that he had said the were-rats dragged people into the sewers. Azadin nodded, confirming it. Midiam then reasoned that the were-rats probably had a nearby facility and a way to move people, similar to the rescue nights they knew of. She explained that such groups usually had large buildings and recruited volunteers. Azadin, however, said he did not think that was the case, implying that the were-rats operated differently and that their base or method might be more secretive and dangerous. Midiam shouted at Azadin to think logically, reminding him that he was a herald, not a rescue knight. She wanted him to focus on reasoning instead of rushing into a rescue mission. Azadin admitted that she was right and said it sounded ridiculous even to him, but he told her to wait while he went to check on something. He then approached a man and politely said, "Excuse me." The man responded that a seeker of truth had come and repeated his warning that the age of Jupiter was near. Azadin, wanting to show respect, gave the man some bread and thanked him for his words. He said that anyone who tried to raise awareness even in difficult times deserved a small offering. The man took the bread and praised Azadin, calling him a fine and devout young man. Azadin then asked if the relief center was still operational. The man explained that the place had been shut down because it was too old and unsafe, and that the diocese in the warehouse district was now handling aid instead. Azadin asked if the man had ever been inside the old relief center, and the man said he had not been there recently. He added that the rescue knights claimed that miasma was rising from below and that entry was barred. He also explained that the building's basement was connected to the sewers and had a large wine cellar deep inside. The man offered to guide Azadin there if he still wanted to go, as a way to repay the alms he had been given. Later, Azadin reached the house and a knight there asked if he had come for relief supplies. Azadin showed the knights a symbol and explained that someone he had met in the underground canal had given it to him. He said that the person told him if he showed the symbol to the knights and brought help, he would be given food. One knight asked if that was all and whether the man had given him a password or anything else. Azadin thought for a moment and said that the man had mentioned something about a password, but he did not remember it clearly. He also said that the man had asked for at least 10 people to come. One of the knights laughed and said that Azadin had come to the right place. Another knight invited him in and said they would prepare the relief supplies shortly. As they brought Azadin inside, a man crossed his arms and questioned why people were being let in during the day. The knight explained that Azadin was blind and had come for relief aid, so he was allowed entry. The man expressed excitement, saying the supplies would be ready soon and added that there would be fresh meat. Azadin realized that this place was actually a den of Mezeri's followers, just as he had planned. He thought about the next steps of his plan. First, he would send a squad down into the canal, and once the enemies were scattered, he and his team would take them out group by group. Suddenly, a man landed in front of Azadin and began punching him, but Azadin blocked the attack. The man laughed and shouted that he had known it was Azadin and that he would take care of him himself. A knight filled with fear accused Azadin of being a blasphemer because he was a herald clansman. Azadin reacted quickly, punching the knight in the face and knocking him out. He then recognized the knight as Curvin and spoke angrily, saying that it had been 10 years since they last met. He reminded Curvin that it was a disgrace for a mighty Aragasa to kneel and serve Mezeri. Curvin emerged, extending his large nails from his hands, and shouted that the emperor had done nothing for them except curse them into servitude. He said that thanks to Lord Mezeri, he was now free from the curse, able to eat and ravage as he wished. Curvin mocked Azadin, saying that even though Azadin was now a herald, he was still weak and an idiot, and that Curvin could knock him out with one blow. Azadin replied firmly that Curvin was too pathetic to watch and that he should not blame the curse because he had always been lower than a beast. Curvin attacked Azadin fiercely, but Azadin blocked all of his strikes. Curvin, smirking, shouted at him, calling him a fool and mocking his strength as a herald. Suddenly, Curvin felt an unexpected pressure on his hand, and Azadin reminded him that he used to crawl beneath him. Azadin then used a special fighting style, Hwajo Pungwol Kazath, and called out Cheongilsong. He lifted Curvin onto his shoulder and slammed him onto the ground with great force. Curvin shouted angrily, with blood dripping from his mouth, asking what kind of Cheongilsong that was. Azadin slammed him into the wall again. Curvin then shouted to his subordinates, ordering them to get rid of Azadin. All of them attacked him, but Azadin slashed his sword with precision, cutting one of the rats into pieces. He then teased Curvin, telling him to stop whining and to go at him himself. Curvin tried another tactic by throwing a rat at Azadin, but Azadin killed it with his sword. Curvin shouted that now was their chance to attack him. The rats rushed towards Azadin, but he killed them all using only his bare hands. One knight, surprised and frustrated, shouted that they were supposed to be the hunters with Mesri's blessing, and that Azzedine was ruining their plans. Azzedine laughed at their pride, calling them a joke and saying that they were still just rats, no matter what. The rats ran at him again, but Azzedine slashed his sword multiple times, killing them all. Kurvin, shocked and desperate, shouted as Azzedine walked towards him, asking if he wanted to leave some last words. Kurvin, now kneeling, begged to be allowed to run away. Azzedine coldly replied that there was no reason to spare a servant of Kurut. Kurvin pleaded, mentioning childhood memories, asking if they did not count for anything, trying to appeal to Azzedine's emotions. Azzedine raised his weapon and asked Kurvin if any of his pleas or childhood memories meant anything to him now. Kurvin, panicking and desperate, admitted that he would give Azzedine information. He revealed that there was a copy of the Divine King's scripture hidden below. Kurvin explained that he had been sent by the Salisma district chief to investigate the missing persons case, but he had been captured by the were-rats while they were gathering sacrifices. This had left him in his current desperate state. He also explained that the discovered copy of the scripture had not fully manifested yet, because the scripture only chose its true owner. However, if someone with royal blood suffered nearby, it could trigger the manifestation, and the were-rats were preparing for that process. Azzedine asked if Baroness Nort was among the victims. Kurvin nodded and warned that if Azzedine wanted to save her, he had to hurry. He said that the were-rats below were far more vicious and brutal than the ones above. Azzedine discovered about the Divine King's scripture. He realized that it responded to human suffering, which means it reacts when people are in pain or distress. This was not common knowledge. Only the most powerful sorcerers among the vassals knew this. Kurvin, who had been working against Azzedine, confirmed this information. He was proud of the knowledge and thought he could use it to save himself. Kurvin hoped that Azzedine would let him go, asking if he could live. Azzedine told him to run, but there was a warning in his words. He never actually promised Kurvin would survive, he only told him to escape. When Kurvin ran, Azzedine attacked him, striking his leg with his weapon. Kurvin shouted angrily, pointing out that Azzedine had said he would let him live. Azzedine calmly explained that he had never promised mercy. Because Kurvin had betrayed them and worked for Mesri, Azzedine could not allow him to live. Then Azzedine killed Kurvin by driving his axe into his chest and wiped the blood from his face. After this, Azzedine thought about the problem he now faced. If he called Midiam and Ishmael for help, the were-rats would likely scatter before they could fight them. He realized he would have to handle the situation alone. Later, Azzedine fought a were-rat. He punched it in the face and slammed it into a wall, mocking it. He said that if it were a were-tiger, it might deserve respect, but as it was now, it was just a rat, no matter how it tried to appear strong. Azzedine faced a group of were-rats who were aggressive and confident in their strength. One of the rats shouted at him, calling him a fool and questioning whether he dared insult Lord Mesri's blessing. The rat demanded to know who he was. Azzedine calmly introduced himself as the Emperor's herald. The rat, however, was defiant, claiming that even if Azzedine was a herald, they were the hunters in that place and ordered the other rats to attack him. A rat lunged at Azzedine, but he quickly kicked it and threw it to the ground. The rats shouted in disbelief, confused that they were being defeated, saying it was impossible because they considered themselves predators. Azzedine killed the rat, remarking that he had already heard the same kind of boast from enemies earlier. After dealing with the immediate threat, Azzedine found a man tied up and untied his ropes. He handed him a weapon, telling him to protect himself for the time being, and asked if he had seen a noblewoman in a red satin dress. The man explained that the women had been taken deeper inside by the were-rats. Another man, realizing who Azzedine was, bowed respectfully and thanked him for saving them, wishing that the Emperor's blessing would be with him. Azzedine instructed them to leave quickly before more were-rats arrived, explaining that he still had business deeper in the area. Meanwhile, deeper in the basement, another man stood in front of a glowing manosphere, marveling at the power of the Yegas bloodline. He was amazed and frustrated that he could not approach easily, even though he was only looking at a single page of a grimoire. Around him, rats were scattered across the ground, eating meat, when Azzedine arrived. He noted that the number of rats seemed to increase and realized he had found the right place. The man in front of the monosphere acknowledged Azzedine as an uninvited guest but declared that it did not matter because all of them would become rat food now that Azzedine had arrived. All the rats charged at him, but Azzedine smirked and prepared for battle. As the man in charge of the were-rats ordered them to attack Azzedine, shouting for them to devour him, the rats swarmed him immediately. Azzedine gritted his teeth and fought fiercely, throwing some of the rats away, but he realized that there were too many of them to fight normally. Recognizing the danger, he ran at high speed and reached a higher point, giving himself a strategic advantage. From there, he slashed his weapon multiple times, cutting down several rats at once. The man controlling the rats watched Azadin's skill and was surprised, thinking that killing him with just a swarm of rats would not be easy. He began to suspect Azadin's identity, realizing from his skill and presence that he must be from the Herald clan. Azadin, noticing the man's intentions, asked if he was one of the fallen paladins from the rescue order. The man laughed and rejected the term fallen, saying that he now served not a false archangel but the true god. Azadin questioned the idea of a false archangel, clearly surprised and confused. The man explained angrily that the commonly held belief in the Trinity Archangels granting white magic was false. He claimed that the Trinity Archangels were already dead and their corpses held no power, and that the rescue order was nothing more than a group of con artists. Instead, he declared that the Kurt God clan was the one true faith. He recognized Azadin's skill and tried to persuade him to join their side and serve this true god. Azadin, however, firmly refused, saying that he believed in the Trinity Archangels. The man reacted with disbelief, repeating that the Archangels were dead and that even the knights who used white magic came only from noble bloodlines. He claimed he spoke from personal experience, insisting that the faith had betrayed him. Suddenly, 2 large rats charged at Azadin. He reacted quickly, kicking them with such force that they crashed to the ground. They attacked again, but Azadin leapt high into the air and slammed his kick onto one of the rats' heads, shaking the ground from the impact. Despite his strength, he realized that the rats just kept coming endlessly. Thinking quickly, he grabbed his robe, turned it into a sack, and shouted while using it to trap the rats. All the rats ran into the sack and Azadin threw them away. The man realized that Azadin was insane but also incredibly skilled. He wondered if this was truly the power of the Emperor's Herald and questioned whether it was possible for someone to use a copy of the Sacred King's tome so effectively. Then he noticed that the magic tome of the Yagas God clan had accepted someone who spilled divine blood and recognized a herald as its master. He understood that because of this, the tome's resistance had weakened. He thought that if he killed Azadin, he could take the powerful tome immediately. Filled with determination, he shouted that he could not let Azadin continue to rampage and decided to show the power of a disciple of Mezeri. He attacked Azadin with his sword, but Azadin dodged the strike. Azadin, however, felt something strange and muttered that his life force seemed to be draining. The man smirked, impressed by Azadin's dodges, but warned that he could not keep avoiding attacks forever. He attacked again, but Azadin stepped aside. In doing so, he accidentally bumped into a hung woman, causing the rope that held her to break. She began to fall, but Azadin quickly caught her. The man, with gleaming red eyes, expressed his surprise at Azadin's actions. He mocked Azadin, questioning whether he truly believed in the angels and whether a herald really tried to save people. Azadin shouted in anger, telling him to be quiet and insisting that saving people was not strange or unusual. The man, ignoring Azadin, swung his sword toward a noblewoman who was Tarkiev's mother, declaring that everything was meaningless. Azadin ran toward her in panic, determined to protect her from the deadly attack. When the man attacked, a powerful blast occurred, and everyone expected Azadin to be killed. The man shouted in disbelief, thinking Azadin had foolishly put himself in danger. However, when the dust cleared, the man was shocked to see that Azadin was completely unharmed and was holding the noble lady safely. The man could not believe it, thinking that any living person would have had all their life force drained by such an attack. Azadin calmly explained that he was highly resistant to dark mana, which allowed him to survive attacks that would normally kill anyone. The man, enraged and desperate, shouted that he would kill Azadin for real this time. Azadin, confident and determined, jumped at him and said that he was sorry, but the man would not be able to do much anymore because Azadin had the advantage in a place like this. Despite this, the man raised his sword glowing with dark mana and tried to attack again. Azadin stepped aside with speed and precision, demonstrating that the man could not keep up with him. The man realized that Azadin was too fast and skilled for him to land any effective attacks. Azadin then slammed the man into the ground with a powerful move, saying that it was over and chanting the words of Kazas' script, "Clear day's pine tree, solely clear and tranquil." The man, lying on the ground and covered in blood, muttered that he had not even gotten a chance to transform. Azadin calmly remarked that the man should have transformed much earlier, and that he had been too drunk on the power of Mezeri. Azadin noticed a glowing manosphere with a page inside it. He immediately recognized it as a copy of the Divine King's scripture. Holding it carefully, he realized that this was the third copy he had collected. While carrying the noble lady, he thought to himself that things had become a bit messier than he had intended, but at least the Emperor's law had been fulfilled once again. Later, Azadin stepped outside and was met by Midiam, who scolded him for going into the dangerous area alone. She reminded him that they were supposed to divide up the enemies among themselves. Azadin explained that he had no choice because one of the enemies was an acquaintance of the clan, implying that he needed to handle that situation personally. Tarkiev, worried about his mother, asked if she was all right since she looked unconscious. His mother reassured him that she had been awake the entire time but had been worried about how her savior would act. She apologized for being so close to him. Midiam, still tense, told Azadin that he could now put the noble lady down. Azadin carefully lowered her and then asked Midiam about the people who had come out from the underground tunnels. Midiam explained that Ishmael had led them outside safely, and that the rescuer's order would arrive soon to handle the situation, since it was their building. Azadin felt relieved and said that he wanted to rest now. Later, Azadin sat in the drawing room with the noble lady and her son Tarkiev. The noble lady began by asking Azadin if his name was correct, and he confirmed it. She immediately connected his name to a famous legend from the old land of Anukia, the legendary eyeless dragon named Ashidin. She also mentioned that she had learned about this legend while studying magic. Azadin started to speak about their shared experiences with her son, but Midiam interrupted, reminding him that they had been promised the emperor's golden coins for saving the noble lady and her son. Azadin asked about the origin of the coins, and the noble lady explained that they had been family heirlooms. She had given a coin to Tarkiev as a charm before he left and had also given coins to the mercenaries she had hired. The noble lady expressed gratitude to Azadin and Midiam, thanking them for saving her and her son. She invited them to stay comfortably in Salasma, offering the coins as promised. Tarkiev also confirmed that the coins had helped him secure the help of the mercenaries. However, Azadin noticed something suspicious. He realized that the noble lady possessed something that belonged to Arthra, the Spider Queen. During the night, Ishmael had told Midiam that the rescue order had arrived. The rescue order was an organization that helped people and claimed to be charitable and fair. Midiam agreed but noticed something suspicious. She realized that while the rescue order appeared good, they were hiding their mistakes. Even when there were serious problems like droughts, people still gave donations because the order claimed to be fair and religious. Midiam thought about the Hybris people who believed strongly in the afterlife. These people donated to the rescue order to gain merit or rewards in the afterlife, but in reality, they were careless about how the order was actually managed. She noticed that the rescue order in Salasma was split into 3 separate groups, each watching the others. This division meant that no one had realized that one of their relief centers had been taken over by a were-rat den, a secret and dangerous hideout for enemies. The next morning, Azadin stretched and felt pain all over his body. He had stayed awake all night, carefully watching the escape route from the mansion to make sure no one could trap them. He thought to himself that he could not trust the Baroness, which meant he had no choice but to act on his own. Then Midiam and Ishmael approached him. Midiam asked if he was awake. Azadin asked where they had been, and Midiam explained that she had only looked around nearby and noticed how tired he looked. Azadin said he was simply sleepy and that nothing unusual had happened. Midiam added that other than the servants bringing in a large amount of ingredients, everything seemed normal. However, she found it strange that the servants were acting as if they wanted to impress someone. Azadin asked Midiam what she was thinking and then turned to the maid, noting that the breakfast they had prepared was unusually large and fancy. The maid replied that she would serve the meal immediately. Midiam looked at the food and commented that it was quite fancy and wondered if the Baroness had fallen for Azadin. Azadin quickly dismissed the idea, reminding her not to forget that the Baroness was Tarki's biological mother. Midiam continued, noting how young the Baroness appeared, and said she could easily believe someone if they said the Baroness was in her 20s, thinking that it must be the blessing of the Spider Queen that kept her looking so youthful. Azadin then asked if the Baroness was currently at the mansion. Ishmael, while eating, said he had heard that she had gone to Count Kazal's castle that morning. Midiam became excited and reminded Azadin that Branch Chief Salem had mentioned Count Kazal was searching for a copy of the Sacred King's tome with some strange witch. She speculated that the Baroness might actually be that witch and that she had discovered Azadin was collecting copies of the Sacred King's tome, possibly trying to trick him to steal them. Azadin agreed that her reasoning was smart but pointed out that it would not make sense for the Baroness to have been captured in the were-rat's den if she were truly trying to steal the tomes. Still, he acknowledged that she had raised an important point. The Baroness was suspicious, and her intentions were unclear. He decided that they should use the bone wand they had taken earlier to test her. Since it had belonged to a spider mercenary, he believed the Baroness would react if she knew anything about it. Azadin concluded that he should meet the Baroness when she returned to learn more and carefully assess the situation. Later, Azadin was sitting at a tea table with Tarkiev's mother. She had invited him to her room for tea and explained that she had planned to dine with him when she returned but was running late. She expressed concern about taking up too much of his time. Azadin reassured her that it was fine and mentioned that he had heard she had gone to see Count Kazal. She explained that since she had been kidnapped, the Count had asked about her well-being but had not met her directly. Instead, he had instructed her to report to the head maid and then told her to leave. She also mentioned that ogre and goblin armies were advancing from the east, which she assumed was why the Count was busy and could not meet her personally. Azadin then asked her about her knowledge of magic, remembering that she had studied it before. He showed her a magical wand and asked if she could use it. She replied that she had never seen it before, but it did not look like a normal magical tool. She said it seemed to belong to followers of the Kurt God clan, known as the King of Fangs or Horns, which suggested it was a rare or dangerous artifact. Suddenly, dark flames appeared from the wand, and Azadin realized that it was pointing toward Count Kazal's castle. The Baroness confirmed his suspicion by asking if he was searching for the Sacred King's tome. He nodded, and then she explained that Count Kazal was currently collecting copies of the Sacred King's tome, which meant that Azadin would inevitably encounter him during his mission. Azadin asked if she intended to stop him, but she denied it. She stood up from her chair and said that they had never truly been married in the first place. She explained that Count Kazal was devoted to a witch he had brought from the Bruma jungle, and so she had planned to use this opportunity to sell the mansion and move to Baron Nort's domain, where she intended to remarry and start a new life. Then, holding Azadin's hand, she offered to provide information about Count Kazal if he wanted it. Azadin smiled and thanked her sincerely for the offer. She blushed and admitted that, aside from that, she had fallen in love with him after seeing him defeat the disciple of Mesri. She then boldly asked if he would marry her and spend the rest of his life with her. Azadin, shocked by her sudden confession, thought to himself, wondering what she was talking about.